Good evening, everyone. Let me call this special town hall public meeting to order. Reggie, would you mind doing such a statement?
Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by notice mailed to the Hopewell Valley News and the Trenton Times, posted on the bulletin board in Borough Hall and filed with the Borough Clerk as required by law.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You are roll call.
I didn't write it down. Ms. Williams? Here. Ms. Hook? Here. Ms. Weaver? Here. Mayor Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Mackey?
Here.
Ms. Stewart? Here. Ms. Paul?
Here.
Thank you so much. So, good evening, everyone. A couple of things, particularly we have a big crowd here tonight and a long agenda before us to talk about our water system. Just a couple of things as we start. So, first is there will be several opportunities for public questions and comments as we go throughout the evening. When we do that, I'll ask that people come to the front of the room. And we're all doing our best to enunciate and project both for the people online watching via Zoom and those here tonight, since we have a good crowd. So I'll ask one, that we limit our public comments and questions to those periods, but also if you're having trouble hearing or one of our speakers is not being loud enough that you feel, try to signal me, raise a hand, and I'll do my best to make sure that we encourage everyone to project and speak so that everyone can hear. We have several speakers here tonight, and we will have them speaking actually from the front of the room near the television where our main presentation will be. We tested it, that should, for those watching online, you should pick that up. That's how we do our planning board meetings, and they'll be closest to you in the audience for what we'll be talking about here tonight. So what we will be hearing about tonight, just a few run-throughs about what the structure will be. First, we're going to hear from Lisa Maddox, our borough attorney, to explain what you'll hear about tonight or might have read about, called the WIPA process, which is the process that we're seeking to enter into to explore the possible sale of our water systems. So she will first go through where we're at, what the process means, the legal requirements, and then after that, we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments in general, but lined up after she speaks. So it'd be a good time to ask questions about the process and how things are going. We will then have presentations from Councilman Mackey, who's the head of our water system, from Boswell Engineering, our borough engineers on technical items, and then from our financial advisors, Phoenix advisors, on the financial considerations about the issues that we're talking about here tonight. After that, we'll have an opportunity for all of our professionals and speakers to answer questions from people both online and here in the house, as well as comments. Tonight technically is a public hearing on, as you'll hear, on the first element of exploring this process. And then following that, we take action tonight. It'll be resolution 2024-69, which will be the process of us, if the record proves it out, starting what we'll call the WIPA process, but there will be two emergent conditions that our professionals believe exist. And the technical things we'll be talking about tonight, about whether those two things do exist and whether this process, the WIPA process, is the appropriate one for the town to pursue versus another process for the possible sale. Well, a lot of people here got here for different reasons, and I'm going to go a little off script and ask for a show of hands. Because we did a few things a little differently this time. We had, you probably saw things in Hopewell Express and Mercer Me and Hopewell Valley News. We did send a mailing. So to be honest, we can't do that for every meeting, but I'm curious, maybe just a show of hands, how many are here because you got this mailing versus some other piece of things? Much appreciated. That's helpful for us to see. This is something that clearly everyone up here and our staff and professional thinks is very important, and we want to include everyone in the discussion. And I think we're pleased to see that, you know, the things we're trying to do to get the word out that one worked. So we did that postcard mailing. You'll see things in online and print media. I want to thank Hopewell Valley News and Hopewell Express for what they've printed to help us get the word out about what we are considering going forward. Mercer Me and our online productions as well. On your postcard or on the front page of our website, hopewellborough-nj.us/water, that QR code from your postcard, typing that in or going to our website throughout this process will take you to everything that we have that will be showing all of our information, when meetings are, when deadlines are, and all the reports that we have. That will be the one-stop shopping place going forward. And of course, if you have computer issues, you're not a computer person, of course, come talk with us. Our administrator, Doug Walker, and I, every other Wednesday, so this was the Wednesday and this past Saturday was the Saturday, but every other Wednesday and every second Saturday, we're here, sometimes with coffee. Coffee's not super popular. We might stop bringing coffee, but so far we brought coffee and some people drink coffee. But if you're not an internet person, come in person. We will be sending email alerts. So if you are not on our email list, if this Sunday you did not get an email from the borough with a notice about this meeting, go to our website, click the banner at the top and sign up, because we do everything from cruise night has been postponed to Friday, down to a water problem or something about a meeting. We always send out there as well. And then going forward, at every council meeting for the foreseeable future, we will have a public session and discussion item on this. So while there will be some perhaps special meetings just on this topic, at every meeting we have, there will be an opportunity to be heard or to ask questions about what we're doing. Tonight is a little special because we have everyone we could possibly find from our professional side, our engineers, our attorneys, our financial advisors in one place. We're best equipped to answer questions tonight, but at every meeting, we'll be doing that as well. And then as we go through this process, there will be items that have specific actions, votes taken by council. At each one of those opportunities as well will be a chance for you to be heard and ask questions. So you will hear from our attorney a little bit about where we are and what this process is, but just a quick kind of overview. We have hired independent consultants. Many of them are here tonight and given us as council and as your elected representatives a lot of information about the state of our system and what our options are, frankly, to bring costs under control. We have submitted that to DEP in draft and had what's called a pre-application meeting with them, where they bring all their people to a Zoom. I think Councilman Mackey joked that said, if we did it in person, we need to get a bigger room. They brought a lot of people out to talk with us and help guide us on the process. The bottom left corner, public notice and preparation, that's for tonight. So we're at that bottom here, public hearing on emergent conditions. That's where we are this evening. If we get through tonight and council agrees that one of these 5 conditions exist, or 2 of these conditions exist that we'll be talking about tonight, we'll be permitted to enter this particular process to consider selling it. We'll hear about what that process is, but that would possibly start, and we send that to DEP. So at several opportunities here, while this is a decision of our community, it's a decision that's also overseen and approved by DEP, Board of Public Utilities, and the Department of Community Affairs, and the State Comptroller at some point or another. And if we take this next step, DEP will have a chance to approve this piece of it. And following that approval, there is an opportunity, if enough folks in town think so, to stop that process through a referendum that would be in November. As you'll hear from our attorney about processes, there's generally 2 ways to go about this. One is the one we're engaging in, which is you'll hear over and over again, is the WIPA process, Water Infrastructure Protection Act. Our professionals tell us if we go down this path, which has an optional referendum if enough people in the community don't think it's going in the right direction, but it allows us to negotiate and we think get the best possible price, rates, and other facts considered in going through the process. The other option is just a pure referendum where we would put it out to the voters to say yes or no. And more or less, we're kind of, any water company that wanted to bid for the purchase, we more or less have to choose between their bids and didn't have an opportunity to negotiate or try to get the best deal we could from them. So if we did start this tonight, and if DEP approves, then we would start on the very long and public process of deciding whether it's the right choice, what the possible suitors would be, what terms we can negotiate with them. And only at the end of that process would we decide as a community, are we getting the best price for what we think? Are the rates going forward going to be what we want? Are we going to get the right level of service that we think we can get? And at that point, which we believe would be, I don't say not anytime soon, but in months or closer to a year than it would be on a short-term process. Then, and only then, would we decide with lots of public input to proceed. If all of those things happen, then what we ultimately are able to negotiate with a possible private entity would be reviewed by the state comptroller, would be reviewed by the Board of Public Utilities, and ultimately by the Department of Community Affairs as well, as being approved here. So when we do that, what are we looking at here? So right now, for those of you here last month and been following, the rates that we have to be looking at on the short term are not ones that we think are sustainable. So the current rates that we are charging now, and have been for some time, but especially now, exceed the regulated rates in our neighboring towns. So Princeton, Montgomery, those who have a private operator, their rates are, after the increases that we had to do, considerably higher than ours. Excuse me, considerably lower. Apologies, that's a bad mistake to make. The opposite of what I meant to say. Our rates are considerably higher than theirs. So, and the future requirements that we'll hear about tonight, that we look to invest in our system that we need to do, we project even higher rates going forward. So that's one of the factors that, if it makes sense for the borough to decide on this, that we would make, essentially need to negotiate and confirm would happen for us, that the rates would be lower. And if they're not, we wouldn't consider doing it. The second piece is what we might call debt relief, or the value of the system. Our professionals have appraised the system and think it's worth somewhere in the range of several $1 million, you know, between $3.5 or $6 million, and somewhere in that kind of meaty range. And if we were to pursue this process, one of the other things that we would look to benefit the town would be what's the best price we can get, and what does that mean either in debt relief or other essential projects that the town needs to do that we'd be able to do. And then finally, service. We're very proud of the level of service that our very small staff is able to do. And in negotiating or deciding what to do, it is very important to us to ensure that the level of service that ratepayers and residents in the borough come to expect would continue or increase. Finally, for my part, my colleagues and I have been really hitting the pavement in the last couple of months for alternatives, and I'll be honest, we're just not going to stop. So we have lined up potential grants for some of the future costs that we're looking at for our water system, things like PFAS remediation, or possibly bring another well online. You'll hear tonight that even with those buckets of cash, our rates still don't line up with what we want them to be, or what they could be potentially if we considered a sale. So we've met with, including last week, used to be called the Environmental Infrastructure Trust. Now it's iBank, about possible funding sources. We met with them several times. We have requests with our federal and state legislators for possible funding opportunities. Meeting our representative and liaison with the governor's office will be here in town again Wednesday of this week to talk about possible options, and the same thing with the county. One thing that I'll just have to note here, as we explore these options, continuing to pursue grants and loans and other abilities to lessen the burden of keeping this in our own hands. At some point, we'll have to make a decision, obviously, either way, particularly because George Herbert Walker Bush in 1992 did impose an executive order 12803, which basically says that if there's federal money that goes into a public system like this, when you sell it, they get it back. So we're mindful that as we line up these grants, we're being very careful to do it in a way that continues to give the community the options of either collecting those funds to apply them towards a system, or not doing it in a way that's going to make it impossible for us to do the right thing if selling is ultimately the right thing. So with that, we'll have, we have speakers this evening. First, our attorney, as I said, and I'll turn it over to Lisa Maddox, our borough attorney, to talk about the process.
Thank you, Mayor, for your excellent beginning to explain the process and just kind of piggyback on what the mayor has indicated. I'm just going to go through briefly the legal and procedural framework of the WIPA process. And again, that's the Water Infrastructure Protection Act. That's where we find ourselves tonight. So through WIPA, the New Jersey legislature in 2015 enacted this law to allow towns to consider selling or leasing their water systems to capable third parties. And when certain conditions called emergent conditions are present. This also doesn't absolutely require, this process absolutely doesn't always require a public referendum. This is different from the traditional, the traditional process the mayor touched upon, where in the past and before 2015, the only way that a municipality could sell its water system was to essentially solicit bids. And then the municipality would get the highest bidder, and then the question of whether or not to move forward would be posed to the voters in a public question by referendum in November. Through WIPA, the legislature created a program and a system through these statutes that allows more flexibility, allows a much more public process, allows more oversight and assistance from various regulatory agencies like the DEP, the BPU, and Division of Local Government Services. And all of these agencies are there to help assist. So another element that's really important with the WIPA process is the ability to set forth your evaluation criteria for the municipality and also negotiate price and rates. And also just how this new third party is going to operate the system. This can all be part of the contract and the process under WIPA, and it's different from the traditional bidding process, and that's why council elected to go this route at this point. So where are we in this process? Tonight, the question, and this is, we're still in the, very beginning of this process, but the question tonight is, what are the emergent conditions, and are those emergent conditions sufficient to justify proceeding with the potential of the public utility system? So here there are 5 potential emergent conditions. We believe there are only 2. I'm not going to get into the details because the professionals, the borough engineer and financial consultant are here to really address those, but these are the 2 basic emergent conditions. The first essentially is that there is a deficiency with something in the water, the Safe Water Act, there's a deficiency or some sort of a contaminant level that affects the availability of water or the volume. You're going to hear about the adequacy of the water from well number 4. You're going to hear a lot about that tonight. And a major issue is the PFAS issue and the need to treat the water. Emergent condition number 5 is that the system owner lacks the financial, technical, or managerial capacity to essentially deal with the emergent condition, which is the PFAS issue, or own and operate the system in a way that supports economic activity in the municipality on a sustainable basis. So you're going to hear a lot about this tonight. Again, I'm not going to get into it, but that's the main question. And the role of council tonight is to determine whether or not there is a sufficient basis to find that there are emergent conditions. And then the next step, if it does adopt a resolution, then the question would essentially be posed to the DEP. All the documents, everything you're going to hear tonight, all the reports would then be brought to the DEP, and the DEP has to make a decision in whether or not, in fact, there has been this demonstration of emerging conditions. And this, we're looking probably at the end of, mid to end of June to hear back from the DEP on whether or not they find that there are emerging conditions. So then, after that, then there's a public notice that goes out. The borough publishes notice that we have received DEP approval and that the idea that the town still wants to go through with the sale. But at that time, this notice triggers an important ability of the public to, by petition, to essentially request and require a public referendum. So if there are 15% or more of the legal voters, let's see, it's very specific in the statute, 15% of the total votes cast in the last election at which members of the General Assembly were elected. So it's a very specific number. If there are that number or more signers on a petition, then the question does go to a referendum. And that means the voters of this town would then vote at the next general election, which would be this November. And it's a yes or no question. Do you or don't you want to go through with the sale of their water utility? And if it's yes, then, then the process continues on. If it's a no, then that question is basically done, and then council would have to reevaluate and restart. So during this whole process, there's also the ability and the requirement that the council goes out to solicit qualifications from qualified companies, people who have to already be in the business of operating a water system. They have to actually, a capable water company that can bid on or that can submit a proposal has to be one that's already operating at the level required by this municipality. So it can't just be a new company that wants to get started in the water business. They have to already be in the water business. So the municipality solicits these requests for qualifications from qualified companies and includes everything and anything and things that are reasonable that the municipality believes are really important for the qualifications of this company. So then the qualifications come in, and this is another opportunity for the public to be involved. This will be done at a public meeting. The council will review the qualifications and determine which of those companies is in fact qualified based on what the borough is looking for. Then the next step is that the borough will put out an RFP and only give the RFP to those qualified companies. And those companies will be invited to submit formal proposals. And this is really important. This is an extremely important part. And this is all set out by statute, but the proposal evaluation criteria they're very significant. And basically, one of the most important elements is that these companies have to be able to demonstrate that they understand what the issues are with the water system here, and that they have the understanding of to be able, and they have qualifications to address those issues. They have to have the finances and the experience to deal with those issues. As part of the evaluation, and again, this will be all described in the RFP, but the minimum is set by statute. They must be in the business already. They have to be in good standing with the DEP and other regulatory agencies. They also have to explain in their proposal what kind of funds they're going to put into the addressing of the emerging conditions and the improvement of the infrastructure in the borough, and also the rate structure that they are going to be willing to employ, and what kind of rates do they need to be able to pay for the infrastructure that's going to be necessary. So that's all going to be in the proposals of you're going to get qualified vendors only submitting these proposals. Then based on, and also part of this is long-term capital improvement and asset management plan is really important. So it's not just the short-term needs of the water system, it's also the long-term needs. So this company has to be ready, willing, and able to be in it for the long haul. It has to be, and they have to itemize everything in the proposal. Then based on the proposals, the council looks at them and says, maybe it's going to, we don't like any of them. We don't think any of them are qualified. That's the end of the process. Or it's going to say, we really do like this one proposal. We think we can come to some sort of an agreement, and we can execute an agreement that for the sale that serves our community. At that point, the decision is made to essentially negotiate with the one selected company. So then council is going to engage in a robust negotiation process about some of the same issues, but it's also very importantly going to address the user rates and the value and the amount that this company is willing to pay. And everything they're going to do as part of improving the system and working for the community. The agreement goes to, before it's finalized and actually approved and can go into effect, it has to get approved by the DCA. For the DCA is going to be concerned and look at how the money that is received is going to be spent to pay off debt, and to improve and help assist with the emerging conditions. And also the BPU is going to look at the price and make sure it's a reasonable price. And then also the controller's office will, if it's $2 million, I believe, or over, the controller's office has to review the contract as well and make sure it's acceptable. So that's the basic procedure, but it's not, I mean, it's in the statute, but it's not always apparent is the public participation. So the public is going to have the opportunity and should participate, and it has the ability and the right to participate at so many stages. So obviously everyone's here tonight, but there are going to be at least 3 more meetings, public meetings at which the public's going to have the opportunity to participate. Then there's the ability to file and essentially demand a referendum that the public's going to have. And Mayor Kennedy reviewed all of the other ways that the public will be able to get information on the website and also at the regular meetings. But, you know, that's sort of the procedure in a nutshell. I don't know if anyone has any questions, or you guys want to ask if anyone has any questions.
I have a question. When you were mentioning the possibility of a referendum and going to a vote in November, so that is not a vote on whether or not to sell the water utility, that is a vote on whether or not to sell it via the WIPA process,
Exactly.
correct?
Right. So at that point, it's really at that point, you may have reviewed RFPs and you may have someone you're interested in. So it's a question of whether or not the resolution to allow for the sale under WIPA, under these circumstances, is going to go through. So if it's a no, you can always decide at a later date to go through a more traditional process. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. So, for those of you in person here, and we've got 34 people online, we'll get to you second. If at this point, while we have our attorney here, I'll open up the floor for our first public session. So those of you with questions and or comments, make your way up to the front. Perhaps we make kind of a line down the front aisle. And when you up to the front, it's your turn, we'll ask you for your name. We won't be asking for your address. We don't have to do that anymore. And then after we're done, those online, everyone in person, I'll ask the online folks through the raise of hand button on Zoom to do so. So with that,
my name is Phoenix Nutter, and it was touched on very briefly, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about, in the case of when you put out the request for qualifications, in the case that no suitable, properly qualified company responds, what becomes the process then? And in addition, once the RFP goes out and proposals come in, even if all of the entities involved are properly qualified, if none of the proposals meet the standards that the council has, what actions are available then? Is there a secondary RFP that goes out? What process happens if those qualifications or proposals don't meet what we want for our community?
Fantastic question.
That's a really-
And I'll try to start a little bit, and Lisa, then I'll point to you, but first off, at any point following tonight, if the borough is dissatisfied with the responses, the quality, the terms, there's no obligation to continue moving towards a sale. And at both the RFQ process, that's when we vet the folks that might be able to respond, and the RFP, the response for proposal process, where we actually get in a proposal from possible suitors, we'd have the opportunity at both of those times to, and the flexibility to reject and not proceed, to reboot, or in particular, because of the flexibility, and one of the reasons why this statute has been recommended to us is that once we vet applicants through the RFQ process and get their responses to the RFP, so we vetted to the group that we can talk to, and then we see their proposals, there is the ability, a flexible ability to negotiate with them, and not when we get to that point where, say, we like one or two providers, they meet the qualifications, we like, one of the proposals is perhaps close, but not what we're looking for, we can go to them and talk with them, and if we get something that's closer to what, or something that meets the needs of our community, we could consummate that. Whereas the traditional path, it's put it out there for the best bid, you get what you get, and if it's not something that we are happy with, then we're kind of done with that process, essentially. Lisa, am I close?
Yes, and once you're in the WIPA process, you get to avail yourself of this process and you can restart it. And sometimes the first time you go out, you don't know what you're gonna get until you go out. And then sometimes you have to tweak things. It happens all the time in a public bidding situation where you don't really know exactly what you're going to get. You get in proposals and you say, wait a minute, we didn't think of this, and you know what, we're going to reject these and go out again because we are not satisfied. So there's flexibility, and once you're in this process, there's no time limit really. Once they start the RFQ and RFP process, you have to complete each portion, but you can restart it. There's no limit. You can do it as many times as you need to. Hopefully you don't need to do it too many times, but you can always stop and say, wait a minute, this isn't working. We want to go to a traditional bidding process. You can do that. You can do that.
Yes, my name is Hans Sidler. I noticed in Lori's presentation that there was a brief mention of leasing the asset. Has that been considered?
So.
I mean, it's an important asset that we should probably keep further under our control than just getting rid of it at one time and that's that.
So, excellent question. I'm perhaps gonna pull an audible here, because I think our financial consultant would cover that a little bit in his presentation, but if he's comfortable, Brian, to answer that question. So this is Brian Morris from Phoenix Advisors. He's our financial consultant, and it is something we've discussed, and perhaps you can take that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk more about the financial implications later. But generally, based on the current status of the market here, the big, publicly regulated utilities like your Veolia, NJ American Water, they really only have an interest in buying the systems at this time. So the lease, situation is typically gonna be reserved for more investment companies, private equity types, and it's not exactly, you're not gonna get the same level of service because they're not regulated by the BPU. So there's pros and cons to going through the different options. But if the goal is to get a dedicated entity regulated by the BPU, it's the sale is really the way.
So what is our option if we decide that we sell this asset? And then we realize that, hey, we're not getting what we need and we've sold the asset. I mean, what's our recourse as far as what happens? I mean, basically, you're selling the water rights of the town.
You're correct, you know, and, it's something I've looked into in other contexts. I don't know of a municipality who has condemned back water assets from private owners. But you're correct, that the reason why we're spending a lot of time in the next months and year thinking about this is that it largely is a one-time decision. We'll certainly will explore the lease option, but everything we're hearing from our professionals is that either we won't get the type of operators that we're looking for, i.e. the venture capital folks are just looking to kind of extract money and not provide good service, or that the people that would provide good service aren't in that particular business. But we are interested in exploring anything that gets the right result for Hopewell Borough. But you are correct. I think largely, this is a one-time decision.
Is it just an assumption or has it been an approach to these operators to say that we would like to lease?
Sure, Dan?
Into that, I mean, we didn't discuss leasing in detail, but some preliminary discussions that we had with New Jersey American Water, for whom we buy about 60% of our water supply right now, because we're actually connected to them, and they are the large utility, they're the utility with the service area that pretty much surrounds us, right? I mean, these places are all regional. They didn't express much interest in a leasing option. I mean, from their standpoint, I think they're interested in acquiring our system. It essentially opens up the doors to expansion from them further into areas where they want to extend their service area. So they didn't, there wasn't much interest on their part.
There wasn't interest or it wasn't brought up?
Oh, it was brought up, but they just, I don't think it's an option that they want to pursue. And generally speaking, if you look at, they've purchased a lot of small water systems across the state. And Brian, are you aware of any that were lease agreements?
No, so I was gonna mention, we work in other communities in the same capacity, and in fact, another community went out for an RFP for a lease specifically to get lease buyers. And American Water responded and said, we are not interested, we would only purchase the system for X. And they got the one bid from a private equity company, so that's my understanding of the way the current market is. I don't think there really is that appetite.
And I hesitate to say that they're the only game in town, but the fact is their system extends to ours. There's no other large utility that is in our immediate area, so chances are that we're dealing with. I also, and Brian, I wanted to make sure that I had this correctly, but when we talked about leasing as a scenario before, and we were talking about venture capital companies, one of the things I recall is you said, in that circumstance, you know, you have an agreement with them to run the system, but you still have all the regulatory liability, which I'm going to talk about the regulatory framework that we operate in. So if anything goes wrong, there's a violation or anything, it falls on Hopewell. We still have that responsibility, which is one of the larger burdens that we carry. And the other thing I recall you mentioning, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, was it's more or less a situation where there's any change in conditions, they immediately, you know, they renegotiate the terms, or, you know, in other words, there's a new regulatory requirement, there's a new treatment requirement, whatever it is, you know, there are no bargains on this. I mean, is that-
Right. That's exactly right. So the borough would still retain all regulatory risk, you know, environmental issues. And then the concession agreement that would dictate the arrangement over a 30, 40-year period. Again, they're not in it to lose money. So if something happened, there would be a formula and a mechanism that would automatically kick in to raise the rate of corresponding amount to cover that, so that their bottom line remains intact. It's very prescriptive. There's not a risk taken on their side, at least in my experience in dealing with those types of arrangements.
And the one thing I also wanted to add was, if we're talking about a large utility, excuse me, like New Jersey American.
Louder, David.
Sorry, if we're talking about a large utility like New Jersey American, we have an opportunity to look at what their operations are like in other areas, actually not so far from us. In other words, their history is evident. And so one of the things we would be looking at is, you know, what has their service been like? How has that been? I mean, we obviously interact with them, and We've had a few issues as a buyer, but, you know, their service area that surrounds us, the Princeton area and a lot of Mercer County was what was originally Elizabethtown Water, and they purchased that years ago, those assets. So, there is an opportunity. It's not as if we're dealing with something that's unknown. We have an opportunity to actually see how they operate. We can look at their rate history, their customer service and so on. So that would be part of our due diligence for considering any sale to any entity.
Let me perhaps ask a follow-up that maybe clarifies this or hopefully helps a bit. For what we're doing tonight, which is setting our path down one of two process options, either the traditional referendum and see what comes back with proposals versus being able to be in a situation to negotiate for the best situation for the borough. Lisa, Brian, is there anything about this decision tonight that would preclude us from a lease versus a sale?
Well, it does, you know, in the resolution, you would be stating that first there are emerging conditions that support the sale. So you are embarking on that process under WIPA. I would think that we would have to include a provision to potentially lease as well in the resolution under the statute. But there's nothing to.
Yeah, I think under the statute, there's nothing, but I guess the resolution maybe. would need
Yeah,
to be-
but you're supposed
So-
to identify what you want in the
If-
resolution.
In one of these iterative reboot process of what we get back, we determine that a lease, or in speaking to one of the operators, that a lease would somehow be favorable. Would we be permitted to exploit that?
Yeah, you could do another resolution.
Thank you.
So,
Because the emerging conditions will be the same.
Right.
Thank you.
so New Jersey American Water owns basically the infrastructure around us, like we're an island. So how does that look as far as we would be getting other bidders? I mean, basically, it's gonna be one guy saying, this is what you got, too bad, sorry. Or do we have the ability to actually get bona fide other bidders?
Well, the information we've received from our consultants is that this particular process that we've set in motion gives us the best chance of getting the most responses and being able to get the best possible deal. And again, if we get to the end and we don't like the deal, we don't do it. But the alternative for exploring it, if we don't go through this process tonight or don't start the WIPA process, would be to put it out there and just see what comes back. And you're probably right, it might be one bidder and it might be a low ball offer. And we're trying to put as many cards on the table for us as possible to avoid that. It still may be a low ball, we still may not be able to get the value that we think we need. And if we don't, then we won't pursue that.
And I mean, so we made this distinction, or at least I made this distinction before, the traditional sale route, as I understand it. You put out an RFP, it's essentially almost like an auction. Okay, it's essentially almost like an auction, right? You put out the terms and you see who bids. And whatever the terms are, it's take it or leave it, that's what you get. In this particular case, as I understand it, we are able to negotiate these terms, every single detail of it. There may only be one person that we're negotiating with, but we have the opportunity to negotiate those terms and decide whether they're favorable or not. And I think that's why we think the WIPA process is the better process of the two. I mean, if you think of it as analogous to putting something up for auction and they hit the hammer and that's what it sells for and you have no other choice, as opposed to a private sale where you sit down with the potential buyer and you work out terms that are acceptable with the notion that if they're not acceptable, you'll walk away from the table.
And you have the benefit from our public report, and also, as one of the slides mentioned, BPU reviews the price as well to make sure it's deemed fair. So it gives you the best, it puts you in the best position to get the best value out of the system.
So you have a lot of experience dealing with New Jersey American Water?
We have a lot of experience dealing with municipalities in New Jersey and evaluating their systems for sale versus lease versus keeping the system. We've successfully worked with 3 or 4 towns, go out and sell the system.
And those towns, who bought the systems?
So I believe it was American Water in most of them, but, not all of them. Veolia, Aqua, Middlesex Water are also other big players in space.
So a document might be helpful or interesting, and I think it's, for what it is, it's relatively concise. But on our water website, there is a report that Phoenix did that is partially explaining the process, but it's partially an appraisal, and they actually list through sales of other systems and do an analysis of what potentially we think our system is worth. And one of the positives of this process is that that's out there, and it will be out there. So when we say to the world, we'd like to sell this, we're also saying what we think it's worth. And if it doesn't come close to that, they're either not gonna bid or we're not gonna accept it.
Would we also look at New Jersey American Water and evaluate them as far as a service provider to find that, gee, you know, they're in advance of their duties as far as the water quality in other areas and other systems?
100%. And you know, while since some of us have been in the weeds on this for a bit, particularly with our consultants, we have some ideas, you know, because we have a nice report on it about who we think might buy it, what we think the results would be, and if we didn't think they're favorable, we wouldn't even be going down this path if we didn't have a general idea of where this could end up. But you're exactly right that, you know, as part of our diligence with any buyer, evaluation of the proposal and the terms that we would insist on, service, you know, of the three important things, it's what people are paying in rates, it's what value we get for our town as taxpayers, and it's what service they're gonna provide. And yeah, they're required by the Board of Public Utilities to have a certain level of service. That may not be what we think is the right level of service as a community. It might be perfectly fine, but that is, of the three things that we look at or will look at when we get these proposals, that is one of the key items. And we would not, I speak for myself, but I think for my colleagues up here, is that while rates are a lot, right? And it's a big part of it. We wouldn't necessarily just go with the one who had the lowest rates and was not gonna be able to serve our community. And I think part of the process with the RFQs, the response for qualifications, screens out to only the types of private utilities that are regulated and have track records in other communities. I mean, the reality is, if it is just New Jersey American that is the likely interested suitor, we don't have to go further than Montgomery or Princeton to see their track record of service. And, you know, we've started doing that, but we'll do it very much detail to know whether it's the right fit for us. And, you know, we're hoping to cast as wide of a net as possible for qualified suitors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, David Waldman. I'm agreeing with a lot of his concerns, possibly even more so. The finality of the sale worries me in terms of recourse. And when I first came here to stand up, my questions changed a little bit, but the question was, does this always have to be a turnkey situation? The notion of a hybrid where we can lease the services, and it's something I really urge us to consider leasing. Because when we're between a rock and a hard place, it's like, who else is gonna wanna build another set of infrastructure as a suitor? When the one company already has done so, they're in a more enviable position than anyone else from a competition standpoint. But my concern is, don't we have the ability to maintain our own water system, albeit that we haven't had the right water to do it because we've got a fouled well or two, but do we have the ability to do it? Well, how have we been doing it for the last
So, well,
100
I
years?
mean, we will have a couple of, I don't wanna say hours, but a good amount of presentation about that exact question. And
Yeah.
what the cost to our community is for us doing it, the expected cost of the other things that we need to do in the future. And then
Yeah.
essentially a comparison of what the private world is able to do
Yeah.
those things for compared to how much we can do it for.
I mean, this is not, we've lived here for 40 years because we love the town. It's not cheap town to live in, but it's a wonderful place to be. And I'm just trying to figure out, and I really urge us all to see if we can help our town figure out some way to do this. My memory might be failing me, but I think it was the Atlantic about a year or so ago, and there was a very interesting article talking about the water services and mentioning some of the places in New Jersey that started doing it. If any of you familiar with that article in the Atlantic Monthly, it's an article I think you should all look up and read. It was pretty negative, and it explained a lot of the stuff that we're now beginning to talk about here, those as problems where we're captive to their business practices, the inevitability of the water bills typically doubling within a matter of 16 to 18 months. There's all kinds of problems that happen and are predictable. And reiterating your point, Mr. Mayor, I think it was you, it's a bottom line, it's a business. And these guys are trying very hard to make a business. For us, we're trying to do a little bit more than that. We're trying to provide services to our community the best way we can and the most effective way we can. And I realize it's preposterous, and David, don't shoot me. I realize it's preposterous that, you know, we've got some wells that are failing and we have all, you know, the PFAS problem, all that kind of stuff. But number one, I am sure that there are grants out there if we beat the bushes and find them, and perhaps bring in specialists to the extent, and I'm not suggesting that our consultants don't have that expertise, but to the extent that there are more grants available, I'd like to find everything we can and explore everything we can to see if we continue to run our town the way we've been running it, albeit with some bad wells. What does it take to remedy the situation? And in terms of, you know, shaking hands with the devil, as I see it, is doing business with someone who we don't have a choice. We're really between a rock and a hard place. We've got failing water. We've got someone who, on a turnkey basis, can become our water provider. But, you know, everything I've read and everything I've heard doesn't mean, I was a business owner in Lambertville for almost 20 years, and I watched them struggle when they sold their business to water companies. The service was horrible, the water was horrible, the filtration wasn't working, mechanically it was failing. Lambertville was a personal experience I had for 17 years of how when they got rid of a water system and sold it to I think it's even changed hands again in the last year or so, to a second company that's handling it. It's been a nightmare. If you talk to anybody that lives there in town, the water tastes horrible, people aren't drinking it, people are buying bottled water, people are installing home filtration systems, it's a mess. So, I don't wanna be an alarmist, but I wanna know we've got, you know, a room full, a town full of really smart people. Let's figure out what our options are. And if there are options beyond a clear sale, I would love to explore that.
David, I'm gonna talk about this some.
Yeah.
Get up there, but we've been doing an analysis for the last 14 months, but really for the last couple of years.
I know you have.
And we
yeah.
brought in a lot of different experts, and we've talked to people with DEP. We've looked at all the grants that we can find out there. So all the things you're saying, which is exactly what we should be doing.
Yes,
We've been doing.
I appreciate that.
And what I want to do is just get some of that, what we're going to do collectively tonight is get some of that out in front of you, because that's really the essence of what this is about.
Right.
So this is a publicly owned asset that's been in operation for over 120 years.
Yes, yeah.
And it's, as you say, it's an irreversible decision in practice,
It makes me
right? If you
really
sell-
uncomfortable.
Right,
Yeah.
I understand it, and believe me, I'm the guy, my joke is, I'm the guy on the bridge over the River Kwai who won't blow up the bridge, okay? But that's the way I've always been, you know, my other joke was you'll have to pry the well house keys from my cold dead hand, but, you know. The thing is, there's a lot to this, and we've been working on this process now for over a year, putting together the engineering part of it, putting together the financial part of it, looking at grants, talking to the NJDEP, doing a comprehensive assessment of our physical assets, how it fits together, what are the capital needs that we have, what are they likely to cost, what would we have to do, what would it look like if we stay in business and retain ownership of the system, what would that look like? and what would a sale look like?
Or a hybrid, but it sounds like the hybrid's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be impossible,
Or
but so
feasible.
far, we're just not seeing it as realistic. So,
Yeah.
so that's what all this is about, and that's what we're gonna try to be presenting to you tonight. Because that's the first part of this conversation is, what's the information that we put together and what is it telling us, you know? And I think if we've done a proper job of that, the path forward may become self-evident, if not perfect. And so,
Thank you, yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, and
Yeah.
John Kennedy, and as a volunteer in town, I want to thank all of you for the time that you all put in, so thank you. Just a question of clarification. Are we here tonight because you all have already decided that we will sell this asset?
No, I think we've decided that, looking at the information we have from our professionals, that it would be concerning for us not to consider it and not to explore all the options available to the town.
Okay,
Hello, Hans Sidler again. So, you stated we currently buy 65% of our water as it is now.
About 60% we're buying from New Jersey American. We have an interconnection, which is right next to this building, which operates like a well. Essentially, we have one remaining operable well. I'll talk about all this when I get up there. And the balance we buy, been buying water from them since 2006.
My question is, why, if we're going to close our wells down, what's to prevent us just from buying 100% of our water and not giving up our?
Well, we'll have some slides on, but put it a different way. If we bought zero water, if our water was free, our rates would still be considerably higher than New Jersey American customers pay next door.
Yes. What would our rates be like if we kept our system under the control of the town?
Yep,
Distribution,
yes.
and our supply comes from, we buy it on the market.
So that would be, we'll have a slide on that. I will say somewhere between painful and disastrous. So our right now,
I mean, right now, we're 65% painful and disaster.
correct. And so if we were to remove the payment we make to New Jersey American Water completely, if the water, we produce it all ourselves, with money we got from the state to bring our wells up to speed, our rates would still be somewhere in the considerably higher than the private rates from New Jersey American, possibly, and we have a slide on this, but maybe even double what their rates are, even if we remove that piece
I
of
guess
it.
what I'm asking, has it been evaluated that what would our rate be if we just bought?
Bought all the water.
Okay. Presentation there.
Yeah, well, I can.
We do have a-
I can quickly answer that question, but not quantitatively, and I'll frame it this way. So our cost for water is the cost of running the distribution system, staff, salaries, benefits, everything we do to get water from the well to you. And then there's the cost that we have at the wellhead. In other words, that's the energy cost for getting it out of the ground and the maintenance on that well. Okay, so think of us as having two sources. One of them is the New Jersey American interconnection. That water is priced based on what I call their burden cost for their operational costs for the whole system, right? Their staff, their capital costs, their debt service, everything is bundled into that water. Then we're buying that water as if we're turning on a well. That water is much more expensive than what we get out of a well.
But
So
we're
if
in
we-
the same boat.
Let me finish, please. If we buy 100% of our water from that source, it's much more expensive than producing water from our wells. So that doesn't solve our problem, because we're essentially paying for their burdened cost for water with all of their overhead, plus all of our fixed costs that we still carry to operate the system. So the economics don't work. I mean, believe me, we've looked at it, and it's, if we were going to stay in business, the better path is to use the interconnection only as an emergency source and try to produce all of our water locally from our own wells, which is an option that we're exploring through grants, because there, the actual cost at the wellhead is substantially less than what we pay at the meter to New Jersey American. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, but my concern is that New Jersey American Water buys our system. They look at our wells and they say, we'll just send 100% from the other systems in the neighborhood.
They may very well do that.
That's a possibility.
And and in that scenario, the rate that we would pay, would be fixed by, a tariff filed with BPU. And at some point would essentially be the same that the customers in Montgomery or Princeton would pay for the water. And right now,
With the degradation in our water quality.
no, it literally would not
I
be
mean,
because
if
it,
you look out and you hear on the TV that, oh my God, Raritan has to boil their water, South Brunswick has to boil their water, you don't hear Hopewell has to boil their water.
Occasionally we do. Occasionally Hopewell Borough has to
We do.
boil their water. It happens everywhere.
and literally, since our water comes from that same place, actually, when they do, at times we do as well. The most recent one was, when there was a line down, I believe, that headed to Princeton, and we had to produce all our water.
We didn't have to
in-house.
well water, but we had basically got no pressure from them. So that, I mean, we are.
I mean, the
actually-
question then is, I've been in the borough 30 years. And why haven't I ever gotten a notice that I need to boil my water?
Well, we've never had, no, I've been here for 32 years and we haven't had a boil water notice. We've come pretty close. But thanks to our operator, Dave Meislich, who, for example, during Hurricane Floyd, he basically, we didn't even have the interconnection then, but he basically shut down our cisterns when they got flooded before anything ever entered the system. I mean, we've never had to do that. And so there is an issue with, for example, we lost service from New Jersey American over Labor Day weekend, right? As you probably recall, we sent out an emergency request. And that was not a water quality issue. It was just they had no pressure because they had a main break over by Route 206. And we didn't have the capacity to keep our reservoir, well, we managed to get through, but we didn't have the capacity with one well running to keep our reservoir full indefinitely. So, everybody was saving and we got through it. We squeaked through in a couple of days. If we had a second well, if we had, for example, well number 6, we're talking about tonight back online, we could have enough capacity that we could have the interconnection only for emergencies, which is actually even better because you have a backup supply in case you need it, in case something fails here. But,
Could we hear the rest of the presentation, maybe?
yeah.
Yeah.
Legal process?
Well, I'll take it in a second, but
Okay.
before that question though, as a reminder, to everyone in the audience, we want to be as liberal as we can with the back and forth, but there are lots of us here, and we are still in a formal public meeting. So I'll ask, remember, if you're having trouble hearing, raise your hand. We don't need a sound. We can see you, and we'll make sure that we speak up louder. And if you have a question or comment, come to the front. So with apologies, come on down.
Susan Shepherd, my question is, where the people who are served by the water system but are not resident in Hopewell Borough get to vote in an event of a referendum? Thank you.
No, actually, they do not.
I don't believe so.
I will say though, there is a process post. Lisa, help me here, but we were talking with DEP about, while they're not involved in the WIPA process, Hopewell Township has a part in allowing the ultimate private suitor to get the permission to operate the system. So Hopewell Township does have a piece in the process later on, actually, through this, but if there was a referendum, it's just voters in Hopewell.
I think it's because we own the asset.
Yes.
right?
And it's the BPU that will review the impact on the township residents and businesses that are using this water. So that's part of the BPU process.
My name is Kathy Fedorko. May I ask that in the subsequent presentations, we avoid acronyms, especially acronyms that are not first explained. What is a BPU? What is an SRA? What is a,
Sure.
we're not experts here, probably. Most of us, some of us may know some of these acronyms, some don't know all of them. So please use the full name. Occasionally use the acronym, come back to the full name, even WIPA, occasionally tell us again what that is. That would help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now, I don't see anyone else here in person. I do see some folks online. There's 35 of you there. I'm going to, if you have your hand raised, I'm gonna move you over. So, first, and I apologize for likely not pronouncing this correctly, but Put you up on the screen here. Is it Stefan? Can you hear us?
Hi, can you see me?
See and hear you. If you give us your name and at least what town you live in, we'll happy to answer your question and take your comment.
Sure, I'm Stefan Grimal. I actually live in Hopewell Township, but we have borough water, live right next to the reservoir. I had two questions. The first is, it's clear, I guess, one benefit of WIPA is that it allows the town to sell the water without a referendum. What's not completely clear to me is why it gives more opportunities to negotiate compared to an RFP process.
Sure. I mean, I'll try to start this and I'll let Lisa and Brian pick up, our attorney and financial consultant, but ultimately just in the statute. Normally when a government buys things, there's not a lot of options. The normal rule of thumb for purchases for the government is what's called an RFP, response for a proposal. You put out what you like to buy. We need a dump truck. The dump truck business comes and says, I'll Harry's Dump Truck Co. says, we'll sell you one for 50,000. Sam's Co. says 65. You buy the cheapest one. That's the only option you have. You have to go with the lowest bid, essentially. This statute
in the statute, is that right? It's required to take the lowest, no negotiation.
Correct. The WIPA allows us to pre-qualify the two truck companies and then engage them in a negotiation about what the price and deals should be. That's just
Okay. So I guess in the first case, we'd have to accept sort of the lowest option, but then take it to referendum, at which point it could be rejected. So it's not like we'd have to take that, right? That would go to the town and the town would vote and possibly reject it.
Under the traditional route, yes, you would get the bid, you'd accept the high bid and then go to a public referendum, up, down.
yes.
No,
Except the no bid. And again, you're not allowed to negotiate. That just seems unusual to me, but.
That's government procurement for you, unfortunately.
Got it. All right. Then my second question was, right. So are the rates determined from the sale based on the price of the sale? In other words, if we sell the asset for more, then the company buying it can set their rates higher. Is that right?
So there's a couple of pieces in that answer. And we've talked to both DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection. They're the part of the government in New Jersey that's in charge generally of water quality. The Board of Public Utilities, the BPU, they're the folks that are more or less in charge of saying, yeah, the prices that a private water company charges are okay. So right now, we've been talking about New Jersey American Water. They have a proposal to raise their rates out right now. It takes them about a year to do it. They have to put a whole case on, convince the state BPU, Board of Public Utilities, that their increase is okay. And eventually some form of increase probably is approved. When we negotiate, there are three, we talk about three legs to a stool, three things that are important to our town. Rate is certainly one of them. The value of our system is one of them. And the level of service is one of them. And I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but in general, if you read the report that Phoenix did, it's a kind of an appraisal. And if anyone is familiar with some ways of appraising assets, one is called the income approach, right? You see how much profit or income might come off of owning an asset, and you do something to turn that into a dollar value, capitalize it. Well, one way of looking at this is what the rates are. The higher the rates are, in that way of looking at a value of things, the higher the dollar value you sell for. We get that. And as a community, we think it's essential to balance those things, and we're not looking to increase the rates astronomically so that we get $40 million for the sale, for example. We want to negotiate and have the best balance between lower fair rates than what we're able to charge now and some return to our community for the value of the hard assets. But you're
Right.
completely correct. The higher rates are, the more the value there is in a sale.
Right. So it's trade off of short term versus long term. Sell it for $100 million. That's great. We got $100 million. Our rates are higher. We sell it for $50. We get no money for it. And then the rates potentially can be lower. So the determination of what's a rate depends on how much we sell the asset for. So in negotiating then, I guess it's hard to know what we're negotiating for. High value or low value or what?
No, it's all in the mix. I think we've said what our priorities are. At some point, when we look at some slides in a few minutes, our rates are currently somewhere in the nature of twice what New Jersey American charges their customers in other towns. We would seek to, as a negotiating point, want to have them lowered in the short term. But the reality is, at some point, even if we can't do that, the rates would essentially increase elsewhere to the point where our rates in town match what they're allowed to charge, and what the State Board of Public Utilities permits, ultimately as a cap. But as one of our priorities in making this work for the town, it's not just waiting 10 years for the rest of the world's rates to climb up to Hopewell Borough's rates, but to get some relief in the short term, whether either bringing the rates down to what they charge everyone else, or something much closer to that is on our list of priorities in choosing if we sell and to whom we sell and for what terms.
I would just add, so if magically today, our rates fell to what the tariff rates are for New Jersey American, literally outside of the Hopewell Borough boundary in Hopewell Township, they would be about half. So in other words, but that, as we understand, that's not usually what happens. Usually there's a negotiated process where they either hold the rates for 3 or 4 years, or you agree to a set series of rates, but at some point, and I'm looking at Brian, because he's the financial expert, at some point, the rates revert to whatever the regional tariff rates are for this whole area. Is that usually correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So we have some idea of what those are, because we have the tariff, it's 125 pages long, it's great fun to read, but we know what those rates are, and we also know what we're paying because we're buying water from New Jersey American right now, so.
All right, thank you. Can I just also ask, I guess all the presentations you guys are giving will be on maybe the website or available somewhere afterwards, is that right?
So we'll have both the slides and the video of this evening will be posted as well.
All right.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna change you back to attendee, so your apologies. I'm gonna move our next commenter, Robert. You should pop over in a second. Robert, if you can hear us and turn the camera on, you are on the air, so to speak.
I'd just like to congratulate you folks for doing your homework. I worked for DEP for 37 years and 25 years was spent in water supply. And there's been very few times when I was as impressed as I am with you. You guys have done your homework and you're headed in the right track. I would caution you on some things. The first thing is New Jersey American is either the first or the second biggest water company in New Jersey. I forget what it is, but it's like 1 million customers, and they're all over the place, and they have numerous sources of water. They've taken over a number of water companies, and they have varied groundwater sources, surface water sources combined, and so forth. And the majority of them are in the same boat as you. They're being affected by PFAS all over, and their costs are just coming in. So I would caution you to make sure that you consider these costs that are going to be going up forward for the next 5 years or so. You're going to see a lot of rate increases, to put carbon filters all over the place. And that's happening throughout the country. The other thing is, you all will pay eventually the same rate as everybody else that does in, the 1 million customers. So when something does go wrong in Hoboken, your rate's going to increase because it gets all into one big pot. It's just, a huge pot of money. Everybody gets charged the same amount of money. I would really, I'm not a big fan of either the private sector or the public sector because it depends on the situation. And I've been keeping up, I live in Hopewell, about 2 miles from Hopewell Borough, and you guys have done a very good job with your water, supremely good. And, but I would request that you get, there's a group out there, they're totally anti-private water company. It's called, Food and Water Watch. And they will give you a good argument for why you shouldn't go private. But that's one side of the coin, and then you have the other side of the coin, what's best for your customers. So I would get in touch with those folks and hear the gloomy side, just so you have the full picture. That's all I have to say right now, but I'm gonna definitely keep informed and see your progress, because you look like you're progressing pretty good.
Robert, thank you so much for your comment and questions, and I'll say, they haven't reached out to us yet, but I believe when PFAS was initially an emerging contaminant, we did hear from those folks a couple of years ago, I believe, as well. So, I'm gonna send you back to an attendee. And I'll say, seeing no other hands raised or individuals here in person, and reminder, we'll have another opportunity later in the evening. I'll take a motion to close the meeting to the public at this point.
I'll motion.
All right, it's Deb first, Krista with the second. All in favor? Next, on our lot is some background on the history, and I'm going to share my screen, David. Well, hopefully between you walking up to the front, I'll be able to actually do it. Okay. And I'll send this into some kind of weird video loop here.
Sorry to have my back to you, but I don't have to look at the screen. All right, so good evening, everyone. Most of you know me, but in case you don't, David Mackey, I've been on the Borough Council for 25 years and the liaison with the Water and Public Works Departments for that time, and chair our Water Supply Planning Committee. So we've been, as I mentioned earlier, we've been looking at this question for some time. And again, it's a publicly owned asset. It's something that's very, I think, dear to many of us. It's not, the notion of exploring a sale is not something that comes easily. We knew from the beginning that we needed to be very systematic and I think very objective about it. Really develop all the information that we can, a fiscal analysis, an engineering analysis, a comprehensive look at our physical assets, our entire system, on a level that's really never been done before. And put all that together and look at, realistic scenarios of, what would it be like if we keep the system? What would we have to do? What might our water cost? What would the benefits or potential downfall be of selling it? And all throughout that process, I've always believed it was very important to present all of this information, to put it in front of the public so that people could have an informed opinion on it. That's what we've done. The main part of this process has taken place in about the last year and a half, between the fiscal analysis that we started, I think, last February, and the engineering work. It's taken a while to put it all together. Pretty massive undertaking for a town with limited resources. So just to start, sorry, can we go back to that first one? Yeah, this is just an overview of the system. This is our service area. It's doesn't really work on the screen, does it? Oh, that's what it is, yeah. So Hopewell Borough and part of Hopewell Township, somewhere over 2,000 people that we serve approximately. We don't know the exact population, 764 connections. So that's how many actual lines we serve, residences and businesses. A little over 10 miles worth of water mains that we own about another 7 miles of customer-owned lines, that would be the service lines that are actually on private property that carry the water from our system to private residences and businesses. I'm sure a few others, how many water main valves, fire hydrants, those kind of things, hardware. We have a reservoir up on North Star Avenue in Hopewell Township, almost 230,000 gallons. The way the system operates is we fill the reservoir, and the reservoir provides pressure to the system by virtue of the fact that it's about 200 feet above the town. So that elevation difference is what gives us the roughly 125 pounds per square inch that we have. And so if you think of the system, we have two sources. We have well number 4, which is our well, located on Welland Avenue. And we have the New Jersey American interconnection. We try to produce as much water as we can from well number 4, because that's less expensive, and then buy whatever we need from New Jersey American. But the system is designed to basically keep that reservoir filled within a certain range so that we have that pressure, and that's essentially what provides pressure to the town. So and the next slide, please. This is not really critical information to you, but it's just a look at how much water we actually use as a town. This is how much water actually goes through the meters. What's interesting to me about it is it's actually decreased by about 20% since 2007. And by the way, we started buying water from New Jersey American, the interconnection in 2006. This has implications for us in terms of, on one level, we don't have to buy as much water. On the other, we still have to pay the same fixed costs. So it does affect our rates in some way, but it's not really a critical piece of information. This is a bit more important, and that is sort of the distribution of water usage. So again, we have about 764 connections. I think we have a few more accounts, some that are split, more people on the same meter. And so what we have is a situation where the majority of people, can you actually see? No, it doesn't work. It's funny. I don't know why it's not working. It does work. So it does. It just doesn't work on the screen. Okay. So never mind. It doesn't work for me. So this is the majority of our customers are in this group of about 10 to 20,000 gallons per quarter. And I just want you to remember that, because later we're going to talk about rates, and rates vary according to how much water people use. So this is kind of important to look at. We also have people, about 50 households that use 2,000 gallons or less per quarter. And that's another important one to remember too. And then here we have people who use considerably more. Some of these are residences, not too many. Most of these are businesses. And some of our businesses, our restaurants have a little break in this axis, but they run up to upwards of 150, 175,000 gallons per quarter for a couple of the restaurants, and a laundromat. So anyway, it's just to give you an idea of how people use water. Next slide, please. So I'm just gonna sort of jump right into a question of what I call our capacity limitations. And these are all things that are related to having a really small system in a small town with a very limited number of customers. And the implications of this. I mean, again, the system has been in place for 120 years, but 40 years ago, mostly all you had to do was get reasonably clean water out of the ground, chlorinate it, and get it to the houses. That's about all you really had to do. It's become a much more complicated world, both from a regulatory standpoint and an operational standpoint. And yet we're still pretty much the same town and pretty much the same size community. So the size of our customer base places some real limitations on what we can do, just because we don't have the economy of scale. It limits what we're able to borrow, because obviously it determines how much revenue we can bring in. And it also limits how much surplus we can maintain. The reason you would maintain a surplus on a budget is so that when you have surprises and you have contingencies, you've got a little bit of money when something goes wrong. And we've been running pretty close to the bone for a long time. And by the way, I'm not going to take any of the air out of Brian's sails. He's the actual fiscal expert, but this is more what I see from where I stand and the things I'd like you to kind of know and understand about our daily operations. The other thing that's significant is we're dependent on groundwater. In one way, that's good. I think the groundwater tastes better, but it also means it's more expensive to produce and it limits our options. So if you were a big utility and you have water coming from all sorts of different sources, surface water, you can change sources when there's a treatment issue. You have different options. You have opportunities to blend. If one source is slightly above a standard, you can blend it with other materials. Here, all of our water comes out of the ground. And The other thing is, if we have a change in our treatment requirements, in practice, it has to be at the wellhead, because we can't treat centrally. If you have a well at one end of town, we have one well in the park, it's not operational right now, another one in the well. We don't have the ability to move all that water in one. So if there's a change in the treatment requirements, you typically have to impose, have a treatment system at each well. So that is also not an efficient situation. It also limits our options. For example, if one well is down, we don't have a lot of options in terms, well, we do because we have an interconnection, but prior to that, we didn't. They talked about this notion of firm capacity, which is what your capacity is if one of your main sources is disabled for a period of time. So losing our water source from New Jersey American over Labor Day weekend is an example of that. We barely squeaked through. And it also, again, lacking alternative sources when standards change. And then, what really important is staff equipment limitations. We basically have one full-time person who works incredibly hard, who served this community for 37 years, who runs this system with help from Public Works. I mean, they all help each other. But, you know, I'm gonna talk a little bit more about some of the things that operator actually has to do. We don't have the capability right now. We can do routine repairs. I mean, if there's a water main break that we can get out and fix, we can do it. And certainly a lot of minor repairs are done all the time. But larger things we have to contract out, and that costs money. So for example, we have 4 leak repairs we need to do that are hopefully gonna happen this month beneath Broad Street. Broad Street has 8 inches of steel reinforced concrete underneath it. We have to use a diamond saw to cut through it. It's very expensive. And so there are 4 different areas we have to do it, and we don't have the equipment to do it. So there's, $43,000 to fix those leaks. Now, those will probably pay for themselves in the water that we're gonna save, but it gives you an idea of, what our limitations are. It also means that we spend so much of our time dealing with the stuff that's right in front of us, and we don't have the staffing capacity and necessarily the capacity even outside, just because of the cost, to sometimes stand back and look at the bigger picture, to anticipate some of these things before they come rather than reacting to them. And there's been a number of examples of this, and one of them is really discovering that we had a substantial leak problem that we weren't able to detect right away, and now I think we have it pretty well under control, but those are the kinds of things that that are a real problem when you're this small. And then we have in-house regulatory and technical capacity limitations. So we have wonderful professionals to support us. And we have other people who've been volunteering their time, one of them sitting in the second row, Sky. And everybody puts in all the resources that we have, but the technical and the regulatory requirements of running a water system are really substantial. And again, to really have to pay for all that support, it's a substantial cost that we're right now not absorbing. We're trying to get by as best as we can. Next slide, please. This is just a list of the various state and federal regulations that apply to our water supply. And this is not just to spam you with information, but so we have New Jersey regulates water supplies and regulates drinking water quality, but they're also accountable to the federal government. Our rules in general are a little bit more stringent than the federal ones. We actually regulate some things that the feds don't. But those first two, the New Jersey State Drinking Water Act and the National Primary Drinking Water Regulations, that mandates what we test for, what the standards are for those things, what the reporting requirements are for those things, what the treatment requirements are. There's a whole host. This is hundreds of pages of regulations that we have to comply with. And the Water Accountability Act, that has to do with our water supply and maintaining our infrastructure so that we can provide adequate supply. Water allocation permit rules, those apply to how much water we can take out of the ground from our wells. All of these things are regulated. Lead service line replacement law is something new that was passed in 2021. That requires us to remove all quote lead service lines within 10 years. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then our water supply operator is licensed and regulated himself. And then, other rules of water. But the point is, there's a lot of this. So imagine if instead of filing your income tax once a year, you were doing it every month or every 2 weeks. That's kind of the world we live in terms of just operating our little system. And I want to make sure everybody understands that, because you wouldn't know it unless you were immersed. I mean, I've lived in this regulatory environment for 30 years as a consultant geologist, but it's a lot. Next slide, please. So these are some examples of, I call them regulatory challenges, regulatory impacts of changes in rules and what the costs are that have been associated with those. So we're looking at a period from, let's say, 2000 to 2021, so 2 decades. So in 2000, the DEP announced they were going to lower the, I'm going to acronym, maximum contaminant limit, known as an MCL for arsenic. I couldn't fit it on the slide. From 50 to 5 micrograms per liter. That was based on toxicological studies and, lots of work, but our well number 6 in the park typically had 30 to 40. We weren't using the well very much, but we took it offline in 2000 when they proposed the rule. The rule didn't take effect till 2004, but we just said, fine, we know this is coming. We'll take it offline. And then we did a series of pilot studies to see about treating it. And actually we volunteered to be a demonstration site for this. So we had people from the Stevens Institute of Technology. They were doing pilot studies there for a long time. They came up with a system that worked quite well. The problem was, for this to work for us, the capital costs were about $1.5 million, not including the actual operation and maintenance costs. And it just wasn't economical for us to do that. We did apply for a federal grant at one point when Rush Holt was our congressman. We tried to get basically an earmark and we weren't successful. So that well has been offline since 2000. 2003, EPA instituted something called the radionuclide rule. They basically changed the maximum contaminant levels for certain radionuclides. And we found that we had uranium and radium in wells 2 and 5. Those were up at Burton Avenue. Those were 2 of our primary wells. We're operating, I think, some of them, well, we had wells there, I think, since at least the 1920s. And 2 different compounds, expensive to treat, 2 different systems. Again, we went through the process of a pilot study to figure out, that's how you figure out what the actual cost for treatment is, what you need to do. And, again, we were looking at over $1 million in capital costs, but then we have to build a treatment house equipment. That's probably another $1 million. So those wells were also removed from service because it just wasn't economical. At that point, the shortest path to get to replacing that supply was to create the interconnection with New Jersey American, which is what we did. We were fortunate because they had extended their service over to Kings Path, just down the road, within 300 feet of us, a couple of years before. But we had to pay the capital cost of the main extension and the meter that we have next door, so we could buy their water. But that's what we had to do to basically restore that part of our supply. So June of 2020, PFAS, perfluoro and PFAS, I always remember. PFAS is a large group of perfluorinated and peralkylate salt substances. There's a ever-expanding universe of them. They're what people refer to as forever chemicals. They're in the atmosphere, they're in atmospheric precipitation, they're in soil, they're pretty much throughout our environment. There was a study that was published in August 2023, where they were actually measuring PFAS in rainfall across the globe in rural and urban and quote remote areas like Finland, and they were finding it everywhere. And the concentrations they found in rural America in rainfall are right about the levels that we were finding in well number 4. So it's not a local source, it's ubiquitous. And now, people who've been studying this are very concerned about it, think that we should have very, very stringent treatment standards for it. New Jersey has had treatment standards for this that didn't exist federally. It went into effect in 2020. And for 2 years, we actually were doing just fine. And then in 2022, we had a single result that was above the standard. So we're now working with the DEP on what to do about that. We've gone through the process of looking at both the cost of treatment at well number 4, but also, and we'll talk about this some more, an opportunity to potentially put a treatment system in well number 6 that would deal with the arsenic and PFAS and possibly restore that well to service. So that's the path we've been following with the DEP, and I'll say that the DEP has been very helpful, trying to help us to maintain control of our system. But even with that, that would essentially take us, we would not have to buy water from New Jersey American, or maybe only in emergencies. But the operation and maintenance cost of that is probably about $50,000 to $100,000. So it's not free. And then finally, we have in July of 2021, the lead service line replacement law. And it requires, replacement of all quote lead service lines. And I'll, without going into a lot of detail on that, the actual lead lines we have in town are what are known as lead goosenecks. They're about this long, and they connect people's supply lines to the mains. And 93% of those were already removed before this law was passed, because our water system operator would take them out for every single paving project. The only place where they're left is under Broad Street, because that's a county road and not one that we paved. So, and I'm very proud of his work. I don't take credit for any of it, but that's something that we were doing long before this happened. But of the ones that are left, remember I told you about that 8 inches of reinforced concrete? Well, that's where 48 of those things are. So you have to solve and cut through all of them. And the price tag for that we got was about $675,000. And the other thing is that this law requires that we replace galvanized steel service lines, which as far as I can tell have no lead in them, but and not only the ones that we own, but also the ones that are on private property, people's galvanized service lines, which I think there are about 115 left. So either the homeowner has to do it at their cost, or we have to do it and bond for it. Add all that up, it's another 1.2, 1.5 million. So this is 20 years of regulatory changes and how they've affected our system. So, you can go back to the next one if you would, thank you. Yeah, so here's PFAS. There it is. So PFOS, PFOS was just perfluorooctane sulfonic acid. See, I got it right. You can see on our graph, so this is our one exceedance that we had. This is over 4 years of monitoring. Fortunately, we just got our last result, 2 years without exceedance. This is the new federal maximum contaminant limit, which was adopted in April of this year. It goes into effect in 5 years. So that's nationwide. So New Jersey's been dealing with this already, but there are many states in the country that have no rules for PFAS at all. So one way or the other, and that's treatable with the system we're looking at, we could treat two, I think. But the point is, everybody's responsible for this. And there's no way around it. So even if we said we're never gonna have this problem again, it's possible that we can still have to do it. And so I'm gonna talk about the Water Infrastructure Protection Act a little bit. We talk about this notion of emergent conditions, which are, again, these are conditions that would warrant the sale of the system through this WIPA process. And the two that we're gonna be talking about a lot tonight, but others more qualified than me are gonna talk about, are conditions 3 and 5. Condition 3 is this, violation of maximum contaminant level is one of the things. Deficiency in service provision or violation. So technically, this qualifies as an emergent condition. And we're gonna talk about this some more. We've applied for a grant for this, but there's no guarantee that we'll get it. So anyway, this is our regulatory situation. So next slide, please. So let's talk about this grant. So with help from the NJDEP, there's a group of people that are trying to administer funds, or federal funds that they come through the DEP. And they're specifically targeted for small systems like ours that have very limited bonding capacity and very limited capacity to deal with all the administrative burdens that usually go with a lot of other kinds of low interest loans. It's a wonderful program. And we were the first people that they contacted about it. And so we sat down with them. We had a meeting back in November when we were talking actually about our PFAS problem. And we said, guys, we've been in compliance for almost 2 years. Do we really need to keep doing this? Can't we close this case? And they said, well, you're going to have to treat eventually because the federal standards are coming. And if you stick with us, we think we might be able to put together a package that would fund treatment of both wells and get your well number 6 back online. And we said, we're all for it. And we're still working with them on that process, even though we told them that we're having a discussion about selling the system. We had this big meeting that we had the other day with 20 people from DEP on the line. They all know about it. And they said, fine, we'll stay with you on this. Let's go down the process. Let's see what happens with the public. Let's see what happens with your decision making. We'll keep the grant warm and we'll circle back and talk again in June, which is wonderful. and this is a group of people at DEP who want to do nothing but help us. So it's really something. And this is just a sketch of the treatment system that we propose in well number 4. It was done by Boswell Engineering. They're talking about the well house. Next slide, please. This is, what next is what I was gonna call this slide, and then I decided to call it something formal. Okay, so you've seen what happened in 20 years. There will be something else. We don't know what it is. We're not gonna blind you with all the chemistry, but these are some of the things that are out there. Additional PFAS compounds, 1,4-dioxane. Every time I mention it, everybody goes, oh yeah, that's probably the next one on things. But Ball's organic compound, it's, gonna be probably regulated at very low levels, and it's in many wells across the country. These are disinfection byproducts, things that actually produce fluoridating water. But at any rate, the point is, chances are in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be another treatment requirement that we would have to find a way to fund. Next slide, please. So I'm going to switch tracks a little bit and talk about our recent water rate increase. Before I kind of hand over the reins to our professionals, we had to raise our rates by between 22 and 54%, depending on your water use. This was a staggering increase by any measure, and certainly to us, and not something that we did without a lot of consideration, without looking at all the options. We had to raise an additional $220,000, partly because of over expenditures from 2023 and partly because of new expenses coming this year. 2023, the biggest one was a huge leak in a customer service line not owned by us, not metered, because it's between the street and the meter, when they finally fixed it, when they fixed it, it was, we found out there was 20,000 gallons a day difference in our daily demand. That's 7.3 million gallons a year. So remember, I was talking about using 40 million gallons a year, roughly. A huge amount of water, very difficult to find. There was no evidence of it at the surface. It wasn't so much as a wet spot. There are main breaks where there's water coming out in the street, and our people get on those, they fix them right away. This one you had to actually find with instruments. We had a leak detection expert who had to come out and find it. And they usually do it by listening to the sound that the water makes when it leaks. We now have a system-wide network of 64 sensors in place. We pay for an annual service. For leak detection, we get monthly system-wide surveys. So if a new leak appears, we find it. You can't have something like this going on for a year, but that leak alone is somewhere between $75,000 and $90,000 worth of water. So I tell people 1 gallon per minute adds up to $5,000 worth of water in a year buying from our interconnection. So that's how we stay. And we have 4 more leaks that we're about to mitigate. They're smaller ones. We found other ones that the water department's fixed. One of the other things we had was, we're trying to get as much water as we can out of well number 4, but we were getting less and less water out of it because the pump was starting to fail, or at least the pumping system was starting to fail. And at this point, we track every gallon coming in and out of the system. So in the first quarter of this year, I see 25% reduction from the first quarter of last year, with all of the conditions being the same. We really had to move on it. So it was about a $25,000 investment. We replaced the pump. We were getting 60 gallons per minute out of it, and now we're getting 115. So that was a good thing. We're getting more than we ever imagined. So far, so good. So every gallon we pump out of that well is less money that we buy, less water that we buy. And just to mention, as a result of the leak mitigation that we've done so far, our New Jersey American water bills have dropped by 30% since the same period last year. And I think they're going to go down even more. And again, additional cost savings, hopefully, if we sustain an increased production for well number 4. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a little busy. I wish my laser pointer really worked on the screen. So the rate systems are kind of complicated. I'm going to talk about New Jersey Americans first, which is the one in orange. They have a monthly fee, which is based on the diameter of the line that you have. Like a residential line is 5/8, we have a 6-inch connection. Fee goes up with the size of the connection. You pay the monthly fee, and you pay a per gallon cost. So the per gallon cost is the same for everybody, and all the other fees that are associated with it. And there are a lot of fees. But our system is a little bit different. We also have a flat rate for that first 2,000 gallons of water. And that's the water that we figure everybody needs just to live. And there are users, remember on that Instagram I had, there were about 50 people that use 2,000 gallons or less. So those folks pay basically a flat fee. And their cost is about $60 a quarter under the new rates. Under the old rates, it was less, it was down here, this dashed line is our previous rates before we made the change, and they pay about $240 a year. New Jersey American, if you were hooked up to them, they would be paying more, that's the only part on this rate scale. Those are the only folks that would be paying more would be actually the lowest users. But for the most part, our rate on a cost per gallon rate basis, which is what this is pretty level across the board. Whereas if you're using this very simple rate system that the American has, the more water you use, the better deal you're getting on a per gallon basis. But here's where it gets interesting. So this is the median user of 10,000 gallons. That means 50% of our customers use less than that, and 50% use more. Remember that big bump in that histogram? That was 10 to 20,000 gallons. So that's over 300 of our customers right in this area. Okay. So if our current rates at 10,000 at the median, you're paying almost $1,000 a year. Whereas under the current New Jersey American rates, you'd be paying about 600. Go up to 20,000 because our rates increase with usage. You know, the difference is now it's about double for that family that's using 20,000 gallons. And then as you go up here and you look at the higher users, which are predominantly commercial, whether it's a little break in here, I just took out the 50 to 100,000, so I can fit all this on the graph, but I assure you it's all legit. This is for a 5/8 line. Let's say you were a big restaurant that had a 2-inch service line. I put that right up there too. So they're paying, you know, at 100,000 gallons, would be paying us $10,800. You know, the difference is staggering. 5,500 if you were buying right now from New Jersey American, and then finally at the very highest at 150,000. You know, the difference is more than double. So this is dramatic. Now, those rates, none of these rates are all going to stay the same. Our rates are going to go up. Their rates are going to go up. And I'll mention to you, you know, for years when I've spoken to people about this, lots of people that are friends of mine who had these conversations before, and they always say, oh my gosh, if we sell the system, they can just raise the rates, they can keep jacking up the rates, so they'll go through the sky, we won't have any control, and that's a legitimate concern. But they are regulated by the Board of Public Utilities. I was looking at, they have a rate proposal for this year, which they submitted in January, and typically it takes them about 9 hours to go through the approval process, majorly complicated. And it's based in large part on their capital expenditures, they justify their expenses, what they spent, the things they fixed, all the infrastructure work they've done. I looked at this question, I don't have a crystal ball. Any of you remember the character Karnak the Magnificent, and Johnny Carson with the envelope to his head? Yeah. So I have that envelope. And it's a model, which I'm not gonna put on the screen because it's just a model. And a professor of mine once said, all models are wrong, it's just that some are more wrong than others. But what I said, all right, well, let's just do a what if. Let's just say, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but our fiscal analysis, which you're about to learn about, suggests that to really get our system on an even keel going forward, to be able to actually bond for the things we need to bond for, we probably have to raise our rates another 14% in 2025. But let's say we did that and we just stuck at a 5% annual increase. I mean, this is maybe more than you think it should be, but remember all the regulatory stuff that I showed you. Let's assume for 20 years, nothing happens and we're just at 5% annually. And let's assume that during that same period, New Jersey American raises their rates by 23% in 2025 and 10% every year thereafter. Well, eventually they would catch up to our rates, but it would be, well, at the earliest, you would see a significant difference. You got 2035, and then by 2045, most of their rates, this curve would rise up, so it would kind of intersect ours. But the reality is, you know, yeah, they're a for-profit company, and they're gonna raise their rates as much as they can, they're regulated, but they have an economy of scale that we don't have. And I think realistically, they might catch up to us, but it's far more likely that we're going to be raising our rates at an equivalent rate just to survive. And again, I have no expertise in that, so that's just my opinion. So my last slide, please. Sure, everybody's relieved it's the last one. So the other WIPA emergent condition, I put this language up there, not to just, baffle you with jargon, but because of this phrase. Can we support economic activity in the municipality on a sustainable basis? That's what we're really talking about when we're talking about the rates that I just showed you. Can we do that? Because, when we presented these rates in council in April, not surprisingly, we had people from our businesses coming in and saying, I don't know if I can continue to operate in this town, paying these kinds of rates. I mean, I think about the laundromat, that's the thing that haunts me. His inputs are energy, water, and rent. And we just raised one of them a whole lot. How much can anyone pay to do laundry? And that's an important community service. That's a very important service to have in this community. So these things are really sobering. I don't have all the answers, but I know that at this point, I know that we have to look very carefully at all of our options because we've reached a tipping point here. Even 6 months ago, I thought we might have a good shot at making this work. Now I'm not so sure, but I'm gonna leave that to others.
I think we were probably. That's right, that's short, yes, our engineer, and then financial consultant, then we'll open it to questions after they kind of do their. We use the word summary testimony, but, first, Bob, our engineer from Boswell, and Lisa,
We can,
do you want to swear him in or just take testimony? I'll leave it to you.
we can swear you in, just.
Okay.
Okay, can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, can you please state your full name? For the-
Yeah, Robert Brightly, Boswell Engineering. Good evening, everyone. I know Councilman Mackey touched on a lot of the system assets. You heard that during asset management plan. But, so I have probably too many slides and I'll go through them efficiently as I can. But I just kind of want to emphasize the effort that did go into preparing the asset management plan. This is the plan. This document here. So the Water Quality Accountability Act requires water surveyors to prepare an asset management plan, and that was done. Basically, asset includes an inventory, graphically locating all the major assets, estimating the service life, including replacement costs. There's also a requirement for water main renewal program under the replacement cycle. Water supply and treatment program, designed to inspect, maintain, repair, asset management plans. You'll see some of those in the report. It's all consistent with the WWA, the American Water Works Association standards. So, asset management, it's management of the physical components of the system. This is going to include your pipe, your distribution pipes, your valves, your tanks, pumps, the wells, treatment facilities, other components of the system. The assets that make up the water supply system, they have a fixed life cycle. As you understand, they lose value over time as the system ages and deteriorates. And proper management of the asset allows the borough to plan responsibly, make informed decisions, managing the assets, to ensure a long-term sustainability of the system. These are just some of the benefits of having an asset management plan. I don't need to go through them all. Its core elements, there's an inventory, consistent consists, condition assessment, level of service, critical assets, life cycle costing, and long-term funding strategy. Should hear more about it. So with the borough's water system, 55,464 linear feet of water main. Connection is 464 service connections. I think there's 41 or so that are in the township. One operating well, one interconnection that was discussed, one storage tank, 77 hydrants, and 224 valves. There's many pages in the asset management plan, there's a spreadsheet, so we have our water mains, each water main has an asset number, the location, the size, material, length of pipe, the year that was installed. On top of this, you just a clip from the plan at East Broad Street, installed in 1914. You go down to fire hydrants, every fire hydrant's been located, physically located, given a number, the year that it was installed. There's a useful life, remaining life. The bottom one you'll see in Somerset is hydrant number 18. In Somerset Street, installed in 1939. So it's 84 years old. Typically has a 75-year life cycle. And the same thing with the valves. You know, there's pages of these in the report. I just wanted to clip a few out. There's maps in here. This is the distribution system map. You can actually see it pretty well here. You can go to the next page. And then all the fire hydrants, there's a map in there of the fire hydrants. You can see those red bullets are each fire hydrant and located. At one, you know, we know the age, model type, when it was installed. And then there's the same thing with the valves. Kind of hard to see, so we also have a valve book and a hydrant book. So this is just one page from that book. This happens to be at the intersection of West Broad Street and, was that Iggy? Iggy on it? So, EGO2, that's the valve near the intersection. It's got a name, an asset number, location. It's a 4-inch valve. It was installed in 2016. It was made by Mueller. And they give you the model number on here. And it actually tells you to close it, you turn clockwise. So there's a lot that went into this plan. This is just a map of the water service line inventory. Some of them, you know, there's different colors in here. It tells year when these have been replaced. The lead service lines, goosenecks have been replaced. You also have well number 4 is the photo, well number 4, well number 6, very unique building. I don't think I've ever seen a well out there.
Mr. Johnson,
I have to put that on there, but, next slide. So well number 4, this is an inventory of everything that's in well number 4. When it was installed, the useful life, the age of it. There's also a risk rating. It's the highlighted one at the end here. You see some red, some yellow, some green on the bottom. We'll get into the risk in a few slides. The borough also has the water tank up on North Star Avenue that was mentioned. This is the reservoir. Again, there's every component in here has an asset number. Now, right at the bottom is a radio control number 5. Sold in 2022. You can see it's green. That's good. It's in good condition. There's the reservoir itself installed in 1914 with a useful life of 75 years. So it's 109 years old. So we put a risk assessment on every asset. There's many of them. So you have a likelihood of failure across the top, and then a consequence of failure. You know, a water main break on a main line coming out of a reservoir would have more of a consequence than, say, a dead end line. And these two are multiplied together, and you come up with your assessment. So what we found in doing this is, there's several tables in here, but the one on the top here is the oldest water line, 1908. Your median install year is 1978, which is actually not too bad. We identified kind of the highest risk water mains, West Broad Street, East Broad Street. One useful thing of that, the plan is the borough has money to do repairs, road work on Newell. So we noticed that Newell's the 10, it's in top 10 of risks, so that water main's being replaced right now before we go through and, reconstruct the road. So some useful information there. So we also developed a 3-year capital plan. This is probably an aggressive plan for 3 years. I wouldn't expect this, but the PFAS treatment for well number 4, an acronym that I'm not gonna try to. $980,000 water, Newell water main replacement, we estimate at 130. Well, number 6, treatment system, 1.36 million. Broad Street water main replacements, 2 phases. We estimate, again, we have the concrete that was mentioned in there and the service lines, 1.5, 1.9. That gets us to the 5.87, I think it's rounded up to 6 million in the financial reports. One thing that is really not mentioned in here, if you went back a couple slides, you would see that there's about 2,600 feet of water main that's left that is at a risk of 13. So it's getting there. There's gonna need to be more replacements. We haven't done cost estimates, but we're probably 1.1, 1.2 million for that replacement of those water mains. I don't believe that was in any other slides. One thing that's, I think, the problem you have to look at is the reservoir. We haven't done any cost estimates on that yet. It's just a 3-year plan. Probably we need to go back and do a 10-year plan, and we would be able to add in some more of these costs. So that kind of gets us into the discussion of emerging condition 5. And just the costs that,
Thank you, Bob. Next, on our final, just for those of you, as we kind of wrap up.
Sorry, someone has to release a babysitter and he had the car keys, so sorry.
So as our final witness tonight is our financial expert. We'll swear him in a second, and then we'll be able to get to public questions and comments in a few minutes. So Brian, you want to reintroduce yourself and get sworn in?
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. Brian Morris.
Thank you,
I
Brian.
only got 30 slides. So this is
Before you start, Brian, if you could, I know you've been at many of our meetings in the last couple of months. Introduce yourself. The report you did is available on the website, explains who you guys are. But could you give a 30-second version of what your job is, who you are, what your expertise is, and why we engaged you for this project?
Absolutely. So my name is Brian Morris with Phoenix Advisors. We are a municipal advisor and financial consultant for local government entities. Our company works primarily in the Northeast. I exclusively work with New Jersey clients. So we work with towns, schools, county, state agencies, you name it. So in our role as financial consultant, we do any number of things. We help finance capital projects. We help with budget analysis, financial feasibility studies, redevelopment projects, utility analysis. So we were engaged by the borough to specifically evaluate the water utility. Now, the way we look at it is from a more holistic standpoint. Simply for WIPO, we just really need to create a value to judge the proposals that will come in. But as a lot of you mentioned, a lot of questions came up today, you really need to look at it holistically and see what's the impact if you keep the system, what's the impact if you try to sell the system, what's the impact if we don't make any capital improvements and just run the system, or what if we make all the capital improvements and what kind of rate increases that would lead to. So our report, as was mentioned, is available on the website, and it runs through all of those different scenarios, how it impacts ratepayers, taxpayers, the borough's budget, you name it. So My few slides here are going to specifically focus on the emergent condition number 5, which is the finance related condition. Also, just touch a little bit on the highlights of the report. The report has a lot more detail, so I encourage you to look at that. This will be a very high level overview. So emergent condition number 5, as was previously mentioned, deals with the financial, technical, and managerial capacity to address the emergent conditions and the issues that we discussed before. So numbers 1 and 2 here, there's 5 essentially determinations that the borough has made with how we can satisfy this emergent condition or how it impacts the water system. So number 1 and 2 here deal with the financial capacity to address those contaminants and bring the wells back online and into good service to replace that American Water bulk purchase, as well as the other capital improvements, the 6 million, I'll use the round number 6 million that was identified by the borough engineer. The next 3 deal with, well, actually, I should say number 3 is still in the financial capacity. That's dealing with the lead service lines that Councilman Mackey mentioned is not included in the 6 million. So it's really not addressed by the financial projections that you'll see, but it is something that's coming down the road and will certainly have an impact on the rates in the future. Number 4 pertains to technical and managerial capacity. So that's being able to properly staff the system. As was mentioned, there's 1 employee, but all of the repairs are outsourced. There's not as much proactive maintenance as there may we like there to be. And then number 5 is essentially summarizing everything that we cannot undertake everything that has been discussed here and presented to you tonight without raising the rates further than what was shown on that slide, where they're already well in excess of what a publicly regulated utilities rates would be, and then the neighbors, and get them to a point where it could start deterring investment in the community, because if builders, redevelopers come in and want to build projects, it will impact the amount they can rent an apartment for if the utilities are double that what they would expect it to be. So this slide addresses the financial impact of keeping the utilities and more specific. So as was mentioned before, due to the cost of the bulk water purchase increasing from American Water, unforeseen expenditures from the leak detection and other costs that were addressed earlier, and some of the deferred capital maintenance that's been building up, the system operated at a $100,000 deficit in 2023. And as we know, faces 55% rate increase in 2024. So that's kind of the baseline. That's where we're starting. Next, the borough engineer identified about $6 million of capital investment that's required in the next 3 years. Maybe the 3 years is a little ambitious, but realistically, it should all be done, as soon as possible. And again, that excludes the cost of the lead service line remediation and some of those other the what's next that was brought up earlier. The good news, as was mentioned as well, is 2.34 million of grant money is potentially available to help offset the need to finance that full 6 million. Again, economies of scale, I think, is kind of a word that you'll probably bring a lot. That makes a huge difference on the rates because it's essentially cutting the amount you need to finance in half. If that grant was not available, the numbers that I'm going to present to you in a little bit would be significantly higher, 20–30% higher. Everything that we have in here is predicated on receiving that grant and only financing the remaining about 3.6 or so of capital projects. Sorry, and then there's the last bullet there. Well, I guess it's on the next page there, you can flip, sorry. So the 55% rate increase for 2024, you can see the 14% rate increase is projected for 2025, and then at least 2% rate increases annually thereafter. We identified some of the key operating expenses that will be increasing. This is not everything, But salaries and wages is facing about a $90,000 increase due to that technical staffing, bringing on more staff to help be more proactive. Operations and maintenance is projected to go up about $80,000 over the next few years. And that's due to the additional costs once those wells are back online. More attention will be needed to pay to them. You'll see that the operating O&M number will go down over time, and that's a function of getting the wells back online and reducing the bulk purchase from American Water. However, the inverse of that is you now have this new debt service line because you have to finance not the grant part of it, but finance the rest of the capital projects. So even though this figure is going down by 250,000 or so, this figure is going up by 265,000 over time. And again, that's just the debt service in that 3-year capital plan, not including any future capital, lead service lines, what have you. And then routine capital repairs. The borough's typically been budgeting about $10,000 per year. We've been told 100,000 would be a more appropriate number, so about a $90,000 increase there. Some other considerations, again, economies of scale due to the size of the system. Every cost increase impacts your rate significantly higher than it would of a public utility. If the borough needs to fund a $100,000 improvement, that's $100,000 that your rates go up. If, for instance, the system was owned by a public utility, that 100,000 would be spread across their entire state rate base, and essentially the increase would be negligible. Now, I understand there's this very oversimplified example, but just to present kind of the disproportionate impact that capital improvements and these regulations could have on the rates. So again, just reiterating the future NJDEP regulations, technical staffing concerns, ongoing capital, all will continue to put further increased pressure on the rates above the 14% and 55% that we just spoke about. I think Councilman Mackey's graph showed it well, that the rate structure even currently is significantly higher than the neighbors, and after these improvements and rate increases would be even higher. So now the financial impact of selling the utility. So based on our report, as was mentioned, we go through a 3-pronged valuation approach that looks at the income capitalization, market cap comparables, replacement approach, and the original cost of the assets. So we estimate that the sales price could be between $4.5 and $6.5 million. We do present a little bit of a range there because of course there's tons of unknowns that can go into the sale once it's out there and bidders are coming for site visits, etc. So per state law, the proceeds must be used to first pay off the debt of the utility, second, pay off the debt of the municipality, and third, for any general purpose, any regular municipal budgetary purpose. So assuming the sale proceeds are used to pay off debt of the borough, we estimate that could generate annual budgetary savings of about $700,000 to the current fund, general fund of the borough each year going forward. And just to quantify that, that's 16% of the total municipal budget, excluding the water utility portion. So that's helpful for tax stabilization, the ability to invest in other borough priorities, the ability to bond for other capital projects. It was mentioned before, due to the size of the borough, your bonding capacity is relatively limited. The total capacity is about $12.5 million or so. You currently have about 8 million or so against that. So, you know, if a big project came up that was over that 4.5 million, as of right now, it would not be able to be bonded for in one shot. Of course, that gets paid down. So that would help free up some capital for future projects. The next slide shows that outstanding debt on the water utility. It's about 618,000 outstanding. It would cost about 555,000 to pay it off. The difference there is because you can invest the proceeds in interest-bearing government securities that then mature with the interest to pay off. So it costs less to pay off than the principal amount. On the general, capital side, there's about 7.9 million outstanding, and it would cost about 7.3 million to pay that off in full. This is all fixed rate, long-term bonds. The borough does not have any short-term debt outstanding. So the total cost to pay off everything would be about 7.9 million. That's a little bit higher than the high end of our sales projection. So you wouldn't be able to pay off everything, but it would pay off a big chunk of the debt, which again would translate into direct taxpayer savings in the general budget, whether it be providing money for tax stabilization, new capital projects, or whatever it may be. So that is everything that I have for you on the finances.
So, thank you, Brian. So tonight we've heard first, from our attorney about process, then Councilman Mackey, about some of the history. Our engineer, the goal there was to get information about the, needs of the system, the work that needs to happen going forward. And Brian's testimony was, about the impact of paying for those things, either by keeping it or by selling it. What it means for rates comparatively between us and the alternatives. First, I'm gonna ask if any of my colleagues here on council have any questions for Brian or Bob before we get to public comment, but then we would be opening up the floor to the public. So, open floor here.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. We have cheated a bit. We've had access to these folks for some time, so don't think that we're not thinking about it, but I wanted to open up first. With that, I'm gonna open the floor first to those here in person. So same as we did last time, please come up the center aisle. And at this time, questions for any of the speakers that we've had, and comments are appropriate at this time. Thank you.
Hello again, Phoenix Nutter. Just a general comment that I think bears keeping in mind for everybody involved in the process, and Councilman Mackey touched on it, is that there is, I think, a wider disparity of financial ability within our community than we commonly think of when we think of Hopewell. At least when I moved here, the general impression was that everyone was well off. And in the time that I've been here, you sort of, at least I have learned to sort of see the invisible members in our community, the people that we don't think of as stereotypically Hopewellan. And I think it is very important that we keep in mind how any decision that is made would impact their ability to remain members of our community, whether that is, you know, through keeping the water system or selling it. I just think that it's very important to remember that not everyone is on the same playing field. And so I really appreciate Councilman Mackey touching on that, and I would encourage everyone to remember it as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Hi, my name is Chris Geary. I have several concerns. A lot of them have to do with the terms of the contract that would be between us and the purchaser. And the way I'm hearing you folks describe the process, that would be part of a negotiation sort of way at the end. So what sort of process would you have for informing the town about what the terms of the deal are? And are there some terms that you would consider deal breakers? For example, rate caps or rate freezes, or, you know, we even talked about the possibility in the beginning of the term of the contract that the rates could be lower because the surrounding rates are lower. Are any of those sorts of things in your mind, at least Ryan, I'll direct it to you, are those deal breakers and are such that if we can't get anyone to meet our terms, we will walk away and go on our way somehow? And here's my extra sort of tangential point. I understand the feature of the WIP process is that we can negotiate terms with the best provider. But also if we did an RFP by referendum, we could put all of those terms in the RFP such that if they were not met, we wouldn't be able to accept the proposal. So we wouldn't be able to negotiate them, everyone would have to meet the same criteria, but if we had deal breaker points like that, like rate caps or a certain term of years with a certain fixed rate increase, we could build that into an RFP and make it a requirement that you agree to those things before we even think about accepting your proposal. I mean, those are my comments, thanks.
So, Chris, I think those are very astute points. Speaking for myself, I'll say that the core things that are important to me, and I do think to council, though, often when you talk to other towns professionals who are dealing with the sales of systems, it's how long can you delay them from raising rates, already low rates, to what the rest of the public pays. We are in a different situation in that our rates are approximately double, with the exception of the low, and a lot of care I think has been made in the last few years to treat the smallest users, the business with just a sink, the apartment that uses a very small amount of water. Those rates are slightly lower than New Jersey Americans' rates right now. In my mind, keeping those rates low, as quick of a transition as possible to rates that are comparable to our neighbors, while still getting some return in value. When I say value, I mean dollars, debt relief. But there will be a balance between those two things, with the third thing being service. And while I don't think, I'm personally not prepared to set a specific dollar amount or line, but I believe what you said rings absolutely true, that if we don't hit the thing that we believe as a council and publicly matches the return on value in rates, in dollars, and in service that we expect, that we would not go forward at all. And I believe that even getting to this point, we're committed to go out of our way in a way that doesn't perhaps hamper negotiations, of course, but to be public as possible at every step. I think this is the first time we've, done a mailing. We'll continue to think of these innovative ways to involve everyone and the expertise that we have in our community going forward. But in my mind, calling them deal breakers is maybe a different way to look at it, because I don't know what the actual threshold would be that we work through with our experts. But if we don't hit those benchmarks on those three issues, I don't see this going forward. And I can open up to.
Hi, Mark Peters, 83 West Prospect. Oh wait, we're not supposed to. Say our address?
We know how you live.
Hello. For my question, which I think is for you, just want to say publicly, David, thank you. Sky, thank you again. We're very fortunate as a community that we have David here, who is spearheaded this thing since day one, and Sky continuing to volunteer. So just want to say publicly again, thank you to both of you guys. Appreciate it. Question for you. Hypothetically, if we found a way to do these capital investments ourselves, which doesn't seem like it, could there feasibly be a way that we take that asset, raise the value of said asset, and then go back to a New Jersey American Water with a, hey, we're gonna do this and we wanna sell to you at a higher cost? If we wanted to go down that path, could that be feasible? Have you seen that done in other towns in the past?
So theoretically, it is feasible. I will say there's two things specifically that I would mention. Number one is, although it's somewhat counterintuitive, they like systems where they can make the capital because they're allowed to earn a guaranteed return and amortize that across the rate base. So that's one thing. Number two is, again, in this particular instance, since they have that connection, there's a chance that we could repair all the wells and they may not even use them. They might find no value in them. So I really can't say that, that's more of an internal business decision from their standpoint.
Sure.
So it's, I guess it's kind of a cop-out answer, but the answer is kind of, but maybe not so much in this particular case.
I kind of knew the answer. I was wanting to say it out loud. Thank you.
A good metaphor that I think Michelle Hovan told me, because we were talking about the wells, and if we put in the treatment systems and then sold the system, they might not want to use the well. She said it's like renovating your kitchen just before you sell the house, you know, the new people get the lights right away.
We hear with meters all the time, you replace all the meters, and, yeah, we use the other meters, so we're replacing them all.
Well, another point to make is, Mark, some of the money that we sort of are counting on or has been factored in Brian's plan is from a federal grant. That $2.3 million, right? That's how much it is.
Right.
So if we were to get that grant and sell the utility, they could take that money back.
Sure, alright, so, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, June Schwang. So thank you so much for sharing all the information. It seems like there's kind of an easy option and then a more difficult option, right? So selling, a little bit easier to accomplish, whereas keeping it a lot more difficult. It's been falling on just a couple of people, it seems like, up to this point, and with all the changes over the past 20 years that David talked about. Has the council considered having a committee so that we have like a few more experts involved with the knowledge and the decision-making process itself? Just to work on this so that it's not just coming down to a couple of experts and then a committee who has other town business to deal with.
I can answer that. Well, right now, we have a water supply planning committee that has the mayor and 2 council members on it, but it also includes our professionals. So we have a water supply geologist that Matt Mulhall, we've been working with now for 2 years. We have our borough engineer, Boswell Engineering. We also have another engineering company that has a specialty in water supply and water treatment who we retained actually to support us on the grant application. We have another PhD geologist named Greg Herman who supported us, who used to be with the New Jersey Survey. So we have a pretty extensive network of experts that have been supporting us on this process now for, well, certainly the last 2 or 3 years. Before we even really got engaged in the process of deciding whether to stay or sell. And we bring in people, experts as needed. I mean, for example, we have Brian
So
here,
it seems like for the keeping the water utility, we would need to raise money potentially, you know, to offset the potential increases that would come with, you know, paying for it. So you would want to have some people who can help raise money as well, if there's fundraising needed.
what do you mean, you're talking about grants or
Well, on top of grants to help offset the cost of the
raising
improvements.
money through means other than our rates? I'm not clear on.
Yeah,
volunteers
fundraising.
or-
Yeah.
So, my take on the offers, certainly if anyone has expertise in, municipal finance, we've been pounding the pavement essentially both on the political side, the asking and the begging part of it, to be honest with you, and the technical side, which is exploring grants, seeing if we're eligible. So honestly, if there are folks who have expertise or interest in that, certainly come our way and happy to discuss it. We've kind of backed into a point where there's always a balance on some of these things where some government tasks work really well being crowdsourced. I'll look at some might get mad at me, but the improvements to some of our core streets really was a phenomenal project to have a lot of volunteers on. When you shift towards the technical municipal finance, and it doesn't mean it's not appropriate to have more people on it, but we tend to rely more on our paid experts and fiduciaries. It doesn't mean that we don't need more help. It doesn't mean that we have talent in this municipality that we won't access it. So if you have, if anyone has, if you particular or anyone has specific expertise in any of those fields, happy to discuss and figure out how we can utilize them.
Yeah, I just thought that it sounds like it's been very overburdened and that there's a need to like take it to the next level in terms of the resources that you bring to it and also the potential for fundraising. So so that you could still pursue keeping it, keeping the water utility.
So I guess when you say fundraising, you mean like a capital campaign, like a nonprofit would do to
Yeah.
take donations and?
To help offset the 3.5 million in addition to the grant that you're getting to make the improvements.
Thank you.
Well, also, we are not sure we are getting the grant yet. That's up in the air, just to be clear, because we kind of tossed it out, it's been factored into the report as if it was guaranteed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Susan Shepherd again. I just need a points of clarification here to try to understand what's actually going on looking at my water bill. So I'm in the, the 11, so I guess my water bill is 185 and my sewer is 85. So is my water bill going to 270 and then my sewer also, whatever? Basically, is my bill going like over 300 a quarter? Is that what we're talking about?
I'm sorry, so your usage is?
My usage is 11,
11,000?
yeah.
Yeah, it's the same as ours. So you're a little bit below $200 a quarter for water. The sewer.
Right, but the total bill is 270 because sewer is 85.
Right, so sewer we raised by 9%. We actually haven't raised it in 5 years, and we figured 23% would have been parity with inflation, but we decided not to do that, just because of the water impact. But for water, strictly speaking, I can't tell you exactly what your rate would be. Well, you can probably read it right off.
Yeah,
Yeah, so at about 11,000, so it's gonna be a little higher than the 10,000 mark that I have called out there. It'd be probably a little over 250.
Okay, so the water is going up and the sewer is going up.
Right, but not by as much.
You
Right.
guys have got to communicate this, because this is a massive,
Well,
this is gonna come out in June, right?
Well, we did, lead you to this fact sheet, but there was a fact sheet that we put out before we had the Borough Council meeting in April to talk about it, which is on the website, but Ryan, we can.
Yeah, because I mean, these
And
things.
what that actually has is, I didn't put it on the, slides, but it actually has a schedule. You can look at it and look at your water usage and see exactly how your rates are gonna change and what the bills will be.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but that's a massive communications campaign, because people are gonna get really cut short. Next, is the increases going to finance the well remediation of number 6? Is this increase?
No.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure that we're not like pissing money down the hole.
Yeah, no, it's really,
Wait,
it's partly covering expenses from last year because of the leak that I talked about, and also just critical things this year.
Leaks I get, but we're not gonna do any of that.
No, unfortunately, all the things we talked about tonight,
Yeah.
after this rate increase, are things that would increase rates further beyond what we're talking.
Right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Dean Rock. I live right up the street on Elm. And, I'm also a senior partner in a consulting firm, not in the, utility side. We work with the private, industry to basically find, exits for people that want to sell businesses in generation issues. I heard a lot about the engineering part, a lot about, how we're gonna finance it and all that. What I didn't hear is anything, maybe you did this earlier before I got here, about American Water. I've just seen an ad today on CNBC with American Water, and I noticed something that was rather curious about their coverage area. New Jersey is probably the one state that the easternmost of their coverage area. They're dealing with a lot of issues in Tennessee and Kentucky and things like that, that you said something rather curious to me. One of the things you said is that if something goes wrong with Hoboken, and I don't know if they cover Hoboken, but that name was used, that everybody's rates are going to go up. All right, now, we don't live in a flood area like a lot of the Tennessee or, Kentucky area. What have we done to certify or to qualify American Water as the best? That we spent, from the private sector, we spent a lot of time basically making sure, and somebody mentioned an RFP. We put out, we're not a government issue, so it's not really an RFP, but it's basically conditions that are set out by the owner.
So,
So what do we know about American Water, and more specifically, what do we know about the problems in their coverage area? They're not across the United States, they're in like, I think I counted 12. And I wouldn't normally do that, but I was working on a client issue and I saw it on CNBC and I perked up. Yeah, because I knew that this meeting was coming. But I didn't hear anything about, you know, what are the liabilities that we would be assuming? What are the issues that they have in their system? You know, they talked about spending a lot of money on mitigation of floods and things like that. They also talked about, you know, municipalities or water systems that need to have all of the pipes pulled up. Now, I didn't hear that. I heard that we've got some lead issues with some connections down on Main Street or whatever. But basically the system is fairly new as far as, you know, the pipes being leaded or not leaded, you know. But, you know, just looking at the whole thing, I mean, what do we, if we go in with them, what liabilities are we assuming?
I'll try.
We know what we have.
Yes.
It's kind of like buying a house. You have a house, you know what you have, you know what the issues are, and then you go out and buy a house and you find out 6 months down the road that you basically bought a hole in the wall. With other problems. So, you know, I just would like to hear about what your conclusions were about American Water, and are we considering other companies?
So I'll start with that. The short answer is there's no conclusion about New Jersey American Water, other than we anticipate that they would be interested from speaking with them and their proximity to us. The process that I think you kind of hinted at, I'll try to explain a bit, and Lisa, again, when I get it wrong, jump in. But if we take this step tonight and are permitted to enter into the Water Infrastructure Protection Act process, and DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, agrees that we took the right steps here, one of the next steps would be to write that RFQ, that response for qualifications, where we would start, we as a community and with our professionals say, here are the things in a provider that we need, to Chris's point perhaps, here are the non-starter items in screening possible applicants. So literally we would enter into that process, just first vet possible suitors even to come to the table. And then second, with an RFP or response for proposals to solicit the actual economic proposals from the pre-screened and qualified potential vendors. At each point, we might pull the plug, you know, we don't get the people we want, we don't get the proposals we want. The process that we'd like to engage in would allow us some flexibility to negotiate with if something comes close. And by putting our numbers out up front, like we have here with this appraisal, we know generally the trend has been that bidders come in close to that because they know what we're expecting. But we don't know till we do that. So as far as New Jersey American is concerned, on one hand, the vetting is to come. And we've done some basic diligence on that, but the formal diligence about whether they're even qualified and then whether they're the right person will come through several iterations of formal processes. At each point, we will have public input and votes and meetings on. And I think you made a very good point about, I'll call it the cost spreading, right? You know, they're a utility that covers a good piece of New Jersey. If you look at their tariffs, that's a document they file with the state BPU that governs what rates they can charge. It's set into regions, and some of those cost sharing, you know, the capital cost things are regionalized in some way, and there might be some, I'll say, protection or buffer between what happens in Hoboken and what happens here in central Jersey. But ultimately, they have to, our protection there, or part of our choice here, is the protection of being in a larger system with, million plus residents in a similar boat that are protected by the Board of Public Utilities. When they need to raise things, they have to ask. I'll say we don't have to ask because we have to do it, but ultimately our problem is a denominator problem. We know what these costs are. We have to divide it by 800. They have a bigger denominator, and that's not the whole answer, but when there's a blip in a cost, something like the $200 that came up last year, we see what $200,000 of rate increase or revenue that we need for a water system, what that means for us. And it meant 55% rate increases. A larger denominator and a larger system, in addition to the Board of Public Utilities, I'll say administrative protection, they have to prove they need it. It comes with the denominator too. That doesn't mean that's the right answer. It doesn't mean we get there. It doesn't mean that what they bring to us is what we'll accept. But ultimately, that would be the next step. Advertising to see if they're the right people, or Aqua or someone else is the right, Suez, who knows? And then what they bring and whether it's the right fit as an entity and as a deal for this community.
Does part of your plan include discussing with clients or water systems that have recently taken over and
Yes.
find out, are they delivering on what they promised?
Both from the recent sales and the recent didn't sells as well. And our consultants, if you read the Phoenix Advisor Report, it is a little bit an appraisal. So they like list through sales. So it's like here, X community sold this for X dollars per linear foot or X dollars per customer, or, there's a lot of different ways to value something. But the short answer is yes. That's part of our diligence as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Come on down.
Good evening. My name is Marion Labos. Thank you for, continuing to talk until almost 10 o'clock today. Time is flying. Just wanted to build upon that conversation there about the Board of Public Utilities, because you started mentioning out-of-state utility or their involvement in other states. I believe we are only socialized costs within the state of New Jersey. So for some reason, something catastrophic happens in Tennessee, New Jersey's BPU would not allow them to pass along those increases to New Jersey residents because it is a Board of Public Utilities for the residents of New Jersey. That being said, one of the reasons why they probably don't want to lease to us is because they like to capitalize their assets. You cannot capitalize a lease, so they prefer to purchase assets. Those purchased assets and also those incremental capital investments that they make in their infrastructure, they go to the Board of Public Utilities through a process called a rate case. They present all of those expenses and they earn a 7.01% rate of return on those investments. So on every single dollar they spend, whether or not it is the most efficient way of spending that dollar, they will earn 7.01% on it. The board can question whether or not that money that was spent in good faith, but those are some of the information that you'll find if you go into that lovely multi-hundred-page document called the tariff. So let's see. I do want to also just note that on page 11 of the Phoenix report, it says typically investor-owned public utilities will agree to a set rate case scheduled for 5 to 7 years. I'm guessing that's after the sale.
Yeah, it's one of the legs of the stool in terms of the proposal and the negotiation. The rate, it's usually a 5 to 7 rate period.
So we should also know, as borough residents and as water utility customers, that New Jersey American Water has had a rate case in 2020, 22, and another one pending in 2024. So in general, there will be a rate case every 2-ish years, or fairly frequently, or whenever there is a new regulation that forces them to make a large capital investment in their system. So we will see those costs fairly quickly as they hit the water utility themselves. I have a question in general for, how we handle rate increases from New Jersey American Water. How quickly do we build those into our rates, or is there a considerable lag? Because part of me wonders when I look back at the tabulations in your report of how much our rates have increased year over year, and then I compare them with the New Jersey American Water rate cases, and I don't see how we possibly could have been keeping up with the increased cost of water that we were purchasing, as well as keeping up with the increased costs of our own maintenance and our own employees and our own salary and staff. So I feel like by not making more appropriate rate increases over the last 5-ish years, we've dug ourselves into a hole and we've built an emergent condition that I'm not sure was there 5 years ago. I can also say that we probably have not made the necessary investment that we should have been making over the last 5 years, because if you go into other reports, it also says that we have been replacing water mains throughout the town for a period of time through the 2010s, and then all of a sudden that stopped. So I feel like we created a problem here that probably didn't exist 5 years ago. And if 5 years ago we had done some different things, we might be having very different conversations right now. It should be noted that it's pending, it's actually on pause. The most recent New Jersey American Water rate increase is almost 17%. And that will be go through a relatively lengthy process, because the last rate increase they had of that length went on for it went on over 12 months. While they went through that, they did not agree to 17% in the end, they did settle at something lower.
It was 13%.
And when we met with, New Jersey American about their rate increase, because it does impact us, we pay, as if there's a meter literally right there. So they anticipated September perhaps for their requested 24% increase.
Which is,
It is.
I'm glad that the pump replacement is turning
Oh, no.
than we expected.
Believe me, I know, their proposed rate increase was actually factored into our budget for this year, assuming it takes effect on September 1, because that's usually when they kick in.
Yeah, I was uncertain if we were modeling what that projected increase would look like in some of the documents. Because obviously you picked a scenario and you presented it. That 17% increase might change some calculus, at least in the near term.
I actually have curves for their proposed rates, the ones that are supposed to kick in September. I didn't put them up on the screen because it got way too busy. And
I understand, it was a helpful graph.
But
though.
we've seen them, but I mean, that's the structure that I use for looking at those. And, we'll see what happens to that. The other thing is, in addition to those, the basic service fee, the per gallon rate, they're also able to re-examine their lead service line surcharges every 6 months, because that's based on how much they spend on doing it. And the interesting thing about that is we're actually paying, I mean, it's a relatively small percentage of our overall rates, but we're paying a lead service line replacement surcharge because they're allowed to assess it to all of their customers, irrespective of whether they're resellers like us. So we're paying them money to fix other people's lead service lines. They're not fixing ours.
I'll also note a similar, I'll say injustice that I've also raised with them and BPU, is that they, in their rate case, they tout their low income user program, which as resellers, we pay into but receive nothing.
No benefit.
So similar, unfortunately, cost shift from us to them in our current system.
Yeah, I did notice that in their recent rate case, and I was wondering how that would impact us, if at all the answer is.
If they were to own our system or someone else were to, say we would take advantage of those programs.
Right, but right now we are just a single large customer.
Correct.
Let's see. Bear with me for a little bit here. On page 12 of the report, it mentions increases to hydrant fees and water fees. I think it would be helpful to understand what the ballpark of that would mean. Maybe an average or a high or low range would be helpful. Just like we now know exactly where our water rates stand in comparison to our neighbors. I mean, it's been thrown around that we pay significantly more, but this was the first time I had seen it quantified without actually going and contacting Montgomery or Princeton myself. Because I do think that as a homeowner and a resident, all of these different fees, there's gonna be pluses and minuses, and even if our water rates go down, if other things go up, it's helpful to understand what that bottom line impact to a household is. So I'm hoping that information will come as we continue to go through this process and we get, there's more time to develop this.
Really quickly, if I could, just the tariff that we are on, is the same tariff that Princeton is. Okay, so, and actually, the rate that we pay for our 6-inch connection, I mean, the service fees are higher than what, because it's a 6-inch connection, but the actual per gallon rate is the same. There's no discount because we don't meet their quantity criteria. I think you have to buy 500,000 gallons a day to get that. So basically, the rate we're buying at and have been buying at since 2006 is the same rate that you would pay if you literally left town and went into Hopewell Township and then into Princeton.
Then this is related to the Boswell report. It recommends replacing the water main on Broad Street in the near-ish term due to its lifespan and rural condition. But it also, we're supposed to have the road repaved in the near term. So does it make sense to repave the road if we know that either us or a water utility is going to be tearing it up?
As it turns out, as the report indicates, we don't have the money to do it at the moment. So unfortunately, that will bear out timing wise. So the reality of Broad Street will be that it will be repaved and we will get as many repairs in, it's usually the leak mitigation repairs. And then we will be waiting till after the moratorium for either someone else to do it or the financing in place from iBank or someone else to help us afford it.
And the same is true with the lead service lines that are underneath them, other than the ones that are removed from a couple of leak repairs in the short term. Because there's a 5-year road moratorium after they do the repaving, so.
Yeah. I know we'll be doing it curb to curb on your own dollar, so I don't think we have money for that.
But you still might want either half width or full width resurfacing after you go through.
Yeah.
That's not
pretty.
not included in those cost estimates.
Right.
Are there any sources of funding at the state level to assess with our short-term shortfall? Another fellow community member mentioned that sometimes there's individual line items in the state budget that are allocated to different municipalities to help with similar challenges such as this.
Yeah.
It's not.
So the short answer is we're shaking every tree there and have made every request. Again, I've got a representative from the governor's office here Wednesday. I talked to their representatives the 15th. While they are looking at it for us, I'm not confident that something will materialize for short-term relief in that regard, but we're certainly asking.
Yeah, and as mentioned, we met with the iBank, was that last week?
Yep.
And they had a lot of funding available, just nothing was a good fit for the borough.
Then I guess my next other item is just, and this is kind of like an out of the box thinking, if for some reason there was this compelling case to retain the water utility, but obviously we do need additional staffing and resources for this. Is there a model somewhere in New Jersey, or is it something that we would be willing to consider to enter into like a co-op of resources for other municipal owned water utilities that are facing similar challenges, but also want to continue and own and operate their utility?
It's an excellent question. It's one that's been on my mind for a while. I haven't had a chance to dig into it seriously, but I mean, we have Pennington. They have 4 wells. They produce all their own water. They have an interconnection. They're all going to be treated for PFAS in 5 years because I know it's in the wells, but I mean, everybody has it. But there's Rocky Hill, which is smaller than we are, struggling also. But I think there is an opportunity there potentially from an operational standpoint. In terms of technical and managerial capacity, that would be what I would be looking at. Obviously, it doesn't address the capital needs, but it's definitely worth looking at. This actually came up in our meeting with the DEP. They asked us to leave it. So again, another stone we haven't yet not quite turned, but I want to have a sit. And also I'd just like to talk to them, Pennington and Rocky Hill, just find out how they're handling it, how they're doing, my understanding is that Pennington is contracting out a lot of their management of their water system, but I don't know that to be true for sure. So, but it's an excellent question. It's certainly something we should examine.
And I do know the state often offers grants to also look at ways that municipalities can collaborate and cooperate to reduce said costs. So it was just, since there are a couple of.
Well, we have interlocal agreements on all sorts of other stuff, so it's the same model and if there's a way to make it work.
I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marion, I'm just so excited to have you on this side of the dais.
Yeah.
Here.
Hi, Susan Clara, so I'm all new to this WIPA versus traditional RFP, and if someone could just let me understand, how many other municipalities have gone through the WIPA process and successfully done this for water in New Jersey?
Right? Not many.
So Egg Harbor City is the only, town that has successfully completed a wetland sale. There are a few others that are in the process of doing it. But they are the only ones that have completed one. There have been a number of sales done via the traditional referendum route over the years,
Traditional referendum or traditional RFP, where we put in actually all our specifications that we wanted, people have. to
That's the
meet.
same thing.
Okay,
RFP or referendum.
Okay.
That's the one where you put out the request for bids. It's just a high bid scenario. Whoever gives you the most money, you take it. And then you go out to the referendum. That's the traditional.
right, because it's still like super confusing with how it's being described, like, well, with WIFA, you get these negotiation possibilities, but with RFP, you don't, but it sort of seems like, at what point you get the negotiation possibility, like after you get the proposals in?
Yeah, so we go out for the RFP, say get 2 responses. One has a higher sales price. So under traditional, you would have to take that one. But the other says, we're gonna cut your rates in half, invest $20 million in the system and give you the best service you've ever seen. So you probably want that one, or maybe at least negotiate that one up to a slightly higher sales price. So it gives you that flexibility. It's kind of the different, legs of the stool and kind of different levers that you.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me because I participate in RFPs all the time, and it's like, well, here are what they want, and you have to like meet them, and if you're not even part of the discussion, so, but that's for municipalities.
Yeah, it would say things like, give us, we could crack it however they like, but give a 5-year binding rates schedule, give a 5-year.
In the RFP or in the with?
Well, both technically,
Right.
but
So
one you can negotiate, one you can't.
when you can negotiate after you get the proposals in hand.
Correct.
Okay. All right, and so you're still continuing to talk to the NJ Department of Environmental Protection, because that seems like those are the folks that can really help us figure this out the most.
Correct.
Yeah, and I guess, David, I find it curious that you've never really checked in with how Pennington's dealing with it and Rocky, like, it seems like that's an excellent idea to talk to the other communities who
Well-
probably have similar issues.
Well, they all have similar issues, but Pennington's in much better shape than we are. They have 4 wells, they have no arsenic problem, no radionuclide problem, and currently no PFAS problem. And they don't have an interconnection, so their economics are far more favorable than ours, I can tell you. Rocky Hill's a little different, they're less than half our size, they have 1 operable well on the Superfund site. They took out the other one. I've certainly been looking at what their circumstances are and what their rates are. I haven't talked to them about possible collaboration.
Yeah, it seems like a really interesting solution to try.
Well, it is,
Yeah.
but it doesn't deal with our capital needs, it only deals with our operational
Yeah.
costs, which is substantial.
Yeah, and I understand
No
that, and
question
it
about it.
sounds like we've had the capital needs for a really long time, so it's like.
Well, we
this-
have capital needs forever, there will always be capital.
Understood,
So-
understood, but it's curious to me also, I just really wanna say, like, this feels like a crisis, it feels like this really critical part of our community right now to make this decision, and you've been involved with it for 20 years plus, and a year ago you wrote a letter that said it isn't a crisis, and I'm confused
Well,
by.
we're here,
I'm sorry, what?
we're here to talk about whether there's emergent conditions tonight. Condition number 3, and condition number 5.
Right,
And I think
and
we've heard determined that they both are. Do you have an opinion on either of those, Susan?
so I'm trying to learn about them
Okay.
now, and for me, it's curious that PFAS is now an emergent condition, and we've been getting all these
No,
newsletters so Lisa said that PFAS was an emergent condition, 3 and 5, right?
The fact that we have
Can I
a
finish?
regulatory violation from the PFAS reading from 2 years ago gets us in and satisfies
Okay.
condition number 3.
Okay, so it doesn't mean like right now we're all in danger.
That is correct.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so
It
that's
doesn't.
what the confusion was.
Yeah,
It's
understood.
saying that emergent, and to me, not being a municipal
Yeah.
official involved in water for 25 years, it sounds like emergent means emergency. So that's what I was trying to understand there.
It is-
So basically now I know it's been a long night and thank you for listening to me.
Yeah.
Thank you for hearing this. It just feels like this has been a long road of, we know we have water problems, we know we have water problems, we know we have problems, and now selling it just seems. So, to me, I don't understand why we're choosing to do WIFA versus RFP, that still is not clear to me. That question hasn't been answered, if that was the point of this meeting, but, I appreciate everyone's time and energy on this for sure, so thank you.
Thank you. And as between the two systems, I mean, we've been living this on this side with our experts for quite a few months now. But the short answer is that the advice we get of that path as compared to any other path is that gets us the best chance of getting the best deal and the most options for this community. And I personally support it for that reason, and because I'm the professionals that I trust, our attorney, our engineers, and our financial consultant. And I have some, day job knowledge here, but they tell us that gets us the best opportunity to get the best deal for us. So that's the path that I lean towards. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but as between two different options, that is one of them, and that's the one that we're being advised gives us the best opportunity.
But you mean the option like WIFA versus RFP or sell versus not sell? That's where I'm confused.
WIPA versus is going directly to a referendum that only allows us to respond to an RFP.
Okay.
So in government procurement, there's like this pendulum that swings back and forth. There are times when the people who run the state think, let's be innovative. Let's let people negotiate and get the best deal that they can. Then there are times to say, well, when you negotiate with somebody, you're in like the back room and it's bad things happen. So it's this pendulum between flexibility to do a business deal and these at times dated but legitimate reasons our only option is to put it out there and you can only take the top of the list and not consider the other less tangible items or go back to them if they're close and try to work out a better deal. I think
Yeah, that was a great explanation, thank you.
I just wanted to say something real quick, and maybe it's because it's late, but a lot of people have gotten up and spoken to me about things other than emergent conditions, and Susan is the only one who was kind of scolded for doing so. I mean, I know we're towards the end of the night here, but if everyone else is allowed to say their piece, she should be allowed to say it too. Did you say what you wanted to say, Susan?
I did, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Stopping anybody from speaking.
My only, emergent condition number 3, is PFAS, but I also remember reading, it's also about the quantity of water that we produce and that we don't produce enough. So that's in addition to the PFAS, there's also, we're literally not producing enough water for.
Well, we can buy what we need, but.
Well, yeah, but we're not producing it in-house, so we have to buy it, and it's expensive.
Next comment.
Yeah.
Good evening. Bill Springer, Borough. Been involved here with OEM since the 90s. And I've heard about the water infrastructure problems since the 90s. So if anyone in the room is unfamiliar with it, it's not a new problem. It's not a 5-year problem. It's not a 10-year problem. It's a 30-year problem. And I preface this with my definition of emergency is far different than a lot of other people. And to use the WIPA procedure or the WIPA as opposed to an RFP, I just caution the governing body is that when you look at $7.9 million in outstanding debt for, I don't know what, I'm sure I can get the answer, versus $618,000 on a problem that's been existing for 30 years, did us not properly investing the money over the last 30 years, put us in this emergency circumstances, and now we're using this act as a method of getting out of it quickly. Because that to me would be improper. While I agree, negotiating the deal is the best option, but we all know what the end result is. I'm, a pretty logical person when it comes to this sort of stuff. But some of these wells have been out of service for very lengthy times and all that other stuff. So I just caution, I see there's a resolution to pass and go with the act. That's, you know, if this is something that's been created over several agencies, several versions of the council over 30 years, I just don't know if that's the answer to the problem. It just seems like we're just, okay, here's the Band-Aid to fix the problem. Second thing is, and I apologize because I did step out for an actual emergency. So if it's covered, I will read it in the report, but I do know about the hydrants and that there will be a fee associated with that. Many people in the room may not know, but that hydrant fee will shift to the borough commissioners, which receive 70% of their money from the township, which is gonna have a direct impact. So if this has been answered, I apologize, but has that amount that is going to be incumbent upon township residents already been addressed with them?
So,
Because they have a big say in it.
sure. Well, another way to perhaps look at that, I guess it's that the borough taxpayers ultimately have been subsidizing those functions. I know some communities do and some communities don't. But ultimately, if those features are a fire suppression issue, 100% of those costs have been borne by Hopewell Borough. And I honestly, I don't think this is what quite you're asking, but it's almost kind of a, we're not looking to shift fees to the township. But ultimately, that's what would happen.
There's gonna be a fee shift on
Yes.
your tax anyway,
Yeah,
the hydrant
sure.
rental.
Right.
So the issue becomes is that whatever that rental, whatever the number's on there, and if it's in the report, I'll read it. And I apologize that I haven't, but that fee will shift. And yes, the borough residents will still have to pay that portion of it through their
Yes.
fire tax.
Yes.
But there's also 70% of that fire tax that we get back is from the township.
Correct.
So, you know, this could just create other issues that I wanna make sure that the council is addressing before this becomes a problem.
Right. No, you're right. And so there are two things. So the hydrant fees, we don't charge hydrant fees, as you know. If you look at the current tariff in New Jersey American for what they charge, I'm gonna say it's $60 or $66 per month per hydrant. I did the math on it.
It's crazy.
If you add that up and you also add what we would be charging for fire suppression for sprinkler systems, which we're not. It works out to in the ballpark of about $80,000 a year altogether. Now, part of that, shouldn't really lump those together because that's borough specific, right? The standby fire water for the fire suppression system, but that's a small, I think it's about $15,000. Most of that money is the hydrants add up quickly, right? The number of hydrants that we have. So that is something that is going to be a fee that no one has had to pay for those hydrants. If we shift over, and as you say, a portion of that gets assessed to the, or covered by.
It's just something for the council to consider and for people in the room to know that there will be a shift from one side of the
That's right.
bill to the other
Yes,
side.
yes.
The municipal tax and the fire tax.
That's right.
And my last comment is that I hear a lot about water quality and I live in a borough, so yes, I care. Cost, yes, I care, but you know, and this is no fault of the water department. He's a one-man band at this point.
Right.
Some of the hydrants are in severe disrepair. And, you know, if this sale, and we're gonna be paying these exorbitant fees for hydrant rentals, we should be getting proper maintenance on the hydrants, we should be getting proper flow testing on the hydrants, reports on the flow testing. Will this shift if we do go with if it's say American Water, will it impact pressure? Will that impact volume? These are just things that should be addressed as part of the overall package. And that's my own comment. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And again, sorry, if we cover some of it, I apologize.
No, these are all good questions. I'm glad you raised them.
So with apologies to those online, I'm gonna try to find the part of the screen that would allow me to poll again, because I lost the window here, but not seeing anyone else in the room. If anyone online would like to ask a question or make a comment at this point, please push the raise hand button. Not seeing any, and perhaps giving one more chance to those in the room. I'll slowly entertain a motion to close the public
Oh,
session.
We're done.
All in favor? Thank you. So from a run of show perspective, Ms. Springer, you know, it's in the agenda, but you predicted it essentially. The point of tonight was to get the record out about these two, condition number 3 and condition number 5, to see if they apply to allow us to go through this process that we think has a better chance of getting us a better result to consider. I'll just open up the floor now to council for any comments or thoughts about what we heard tonight and what you've read. Last chance, but questions about the differences in the process for our professionals and what our consideration is in creating the option to go through the WIPA process. So I'm supposed to take a motion if there's no discussion.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I mean, I think if, strictly speaking, in terms of demonstrating that we meet at least one of the emergent conditions, I think we do. I think based on the analysis that we've done in our professionals, we've met that. I mean, that's irrespective of what the decision will be in the future as to whether we sell the system or not, who we sell it to, if we sell it, and what the terms would be. Strictly this logical decision of, do we believe that we meet the emergent conditions under WIPA that would allow us to use that process to explore the sale of the water utility, right? Which is the purpose of the resolution that we're debating tonight, or that we're just introduced. I believe we've met that. Still.
I agree. I have a motion to forward number 202461.
Thank you.
A second?
I'd like to second.
Ms. Hook?
Yes.
Mr. Mackey?
Yes.
Ms. McCullough?
Yes.
Ms. Steeler?
Yes.
Ms. Weaver?
Yes.
Ms. Lanius?
Yes.
Before we close tonight, I just wanna, as often I end up doing here, this is a really challenging topic. And we are only at the beginning of discussing what is best for our community. I am blown away by the thoughtfulness and decorum and all the thinking that has gone in from both the public, our professionals and everyone up here who's been working on this. I know, I think I speak for all of us, that you have our continued commitment to be as public as we have been and to continue doing this as we go forward with these options. In as public a way as is possible to make sure that everyone's voice and input and thoughts at each step can be included in the process. So again, I'm just extremely thankful for everyone's time, all 3.5 hours of it this evening, time everyone spent reading these reports. And unfortunately for all of us, we'll have maybe not this length at one time, but we will have plenty of other opportunities for everyone to weigh in and think about this going forward. And again, and it doesn't get much more hopeful than this, frankly, to fill a conversation like this. And I'm very, not at all surprised, but very heartened to see it. So with that, I'd love to take a motion to adjourn.
All
All in favor?
right.
Thank you, everyone.